Hey everybody, we're going to get started here in about 11 minutes. Just setting everything up. Invite IRI Josiah. We'll definitely collaborate with IRI. It's just, unfortunately, I use Restream, and the last time I tried to collaborate with IRI using Restream, it screwed his stream up, screwed mine up, so we'll definitely make it happen. Yo, what up, Grit? It's the roundtable to be about. We're going to talk the election. We're going to talk the State of the Union. We're going to talk the Supreme Court. We'll talk about basically whatever the other fellows want to talk about, but probably the economy too, since we have Econoboi there. Tommy Nicoletti. Yeah, don't apologize. You didn't know. It's okay. I love IRI. IRI is the best. Let's see here. What's I doing? My condolences to you and your family. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm talking about my grandma Mary. She's 87 years old, outspokenly liberal, a voracious reader, highly intelligent, major influence on my life. Major influence. She and I were like this. Yeah, she passed away. 87 years old, and she was independent her entire life. So she's been single for 30 years, divorced, lived by herself, and lived on her terms until the day she passed away. All right, I'm gonna throw my earbuds in because we got Staxioms here. This guy. No, yeah, I'm Josiah at Pondering Politics, but Econoboi will be here in about 10 minutes. What's up, baby?
Hey.
Stax is restreaming, excuse me, Econoboi is restreaming with us to those who are seeing us early.
What's up, he'll come on soon. How's it going?
Tired, man.
Yeah, tired. I feel that. I heard about your grandma. I'm sorry.
I appreciate that, buddy. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
At the funeral next Monday, so I'll be out of town on the weekend. Gonna miss a St. Patrick's Day pub crawl.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds fun.
It does sound fun. More fun than
I've had that happen so many times that I no longer have any grandparents around. So I definitely know that feeling.
Yeah.
Know what it's like to go through.
I appreciate that, buddy.
Who is Staxioms? That's me. I make videos on TikTok and YouTube occasionally. Very occasionally.
Yeah. Occasionally stretching it. That implies that you have more. You have a passing acquaintance with YouTube.
Yeah, fair. I just I don't know. We'll see. But I make videos on TikTok.
Are you using the right mic? Yeah, I am. Well, now you got me worried.
I think your mic looks good. Sounds good. It also looks good.
Thank you. It is a robust-looking mic, isn't it? It looks very professional.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask, what about, you keep saying Supreme Court, and then I ask you, what about the Supreme Court? And
I don't know where you've asked me about what about the Supreme Court. And to be honest with you, buddy, I love you, but with all the crap I've got going on, you need to limit you need to get all your questions to me in a single text because it's less likely. Yeah.
My fault. Well, I was like, do we want to do the 9-0 decision with Colorado?
Yeah, that's definitely gonna come up. Also, the pending Trump immunity question, and then I want to get
as well.
I want to get everybody's take on, at this point, I think we need to revisit the notion of Supreme Court reform, and actually Pisco might be resistant to that. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't want to speak for him, but we'll see.
Everyone's saying that your mic is off. Your audio sounds different, is what they're saying.
My audio sounds different.
I mean, it sounds a little echoey, I will be honest. Doesn't sound amazing. But I don't think it's terrible.
How does it sound now?
quiet but much better. So turn it up.
What about now?
There you go.
Hey. All right, folks, tell me how it sounds now.
I think that that's much better. But we'll see what the commenters say.
Perfect. Got
I only worked
this.
as an audio engineer for 3 years. What do I know?
He also has an album out.
That's true. I made music when I was fucking 16 to 18, and then
He's 19 years old now, so it's not that. It's not that
yeah,
long
exactly.
ago.
It's pretty recently. No. Yeah, I tried making music forever ago, and then that was not the path forward. So then I got into politics.
No, it's folks. It's the same mic. It's literally the same mic, the same system. If anything, I'm now ratcheting up the gain. Oscar wouldn't mislead me. Real Bill P says Staxioms.
I just subscribed to your YouTube channel.
I will read it. I will read it. You respond to it.
You're right.
Okay. Staxioms. I just subscribed to your YouTube channel. This old guy expects great content. 5x5 at Pondering Politics. Now, why don't you address Bill P?
There's already, well, thank you so much. There's already great content on there. It's just, I make TikTok videos pretty regularly. YouTube's just, I don't know why I don't post there, but yeah,
good question.
I've got a video.
That's a really good question. You should post to it more. See, the thing is, Staxioms.
I mean, I see you posting 3 times a day, and I think that's the only way ever that anyone can operate on YouTube. And I go, I don't think I can do that. So then
that's not true. That's not true. Well, I mean, it helps, but it's also done terrible things for my physical and mental health.
I bet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember you calling me when you were working 3 jobs because right now you're at 2 jobs, right? You didn't pick up another one like a psycho. Right?
So at least for the foreseeable future, I've stopped writing for Luke.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is he looking for someone to?
That's a really good question that you should be talking about live. That's a really good question.
Fair.
No, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Rick. Yeah, but right now I'm down to 1 job, which is YouTube, which is
that's
nice,
beautiful. That's sick.
Got to do something when Twitter is throttled. Yeah. Re-uploading TikToks as YouTube Shorts is like a cheat code. Cat here is
smart.
Correct. Like
it's smart.
But you don't do just minute. You don't do minute videos anymore.
Yeah, I mean, well, so TikTok pays a lot more if you reach more than a minute. So lately, I've been trying to hit a lot longer videos. But like, I've got videos that hit, like hundreds of thousands, like millions of views, and I should just like re-upload those to YouTube. That's an obvious thing I should be doing. That makes financial sense. That makes sense to everyone who would think that through. But I just decided not to. So, because I dislike Josiah, and Josiah gets really worked up when I don't. So,
doesn't take much to get me worked up though in today's political climate. I'm likely to snap at the drop of a
true.
Bucket. All right, got 3 minutes.
Anyone
Pisco
in chat see the movie Oppenheimer?
Pisco says he'll be right here.
Sorry, is it okay that I read comments?
No, you should absolutely practice your reading. Okay. I agree.
Getting off topic. Anyone in the chat see the movie Oppenheimer? That's one of my favorite movies I've ever seen in my life. I've not seen
it, but now I don't want to see it now. If you like it, screw you.
I've got a letterbox where I keep track of my top 100 movies, and I think Oppenheimer made it to number 4, if I'm remembering correctly. It's top 5 for sure.
How do you feel about The Rise of Skywalker?
That is, stop. You're just triggering me. This is your worst take, is that Rise of Skywalker is low-key good. And it's just good. A little bit, it's just so insane.
It's a dumpster fire. It's a dumpster fire, but it's fun.
It's not fun. It honestly gives me an ulcer every time I watch it.
You should watch it more
often. I consider it non-Star Wars canon, and I think it is the worst. I think it's the only bad Star Wars movie. Like the only actual terrible one. Like I consider even Force Awakens fine, neutral, maybe.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool. That's cool. That's fine. I love that you have, low-key support for the movie, which ruined the franchise and set the sequels up for abject failure. That's good. Yeah.
Ryan Johnson was able to make it work. So
Ryan Johnson did remarkably well with the shitty hand he was dealt. Imagine if he was coming after a film
he
that
actually
actually
got to be
tried
in
to do
it,
something
sure.
good.
I agree.
Let's see. Is this for liberal centrists or further left? I am offended at the notion of being called a centrist. I reject that categorically. But whether or not you consider me leftist or liberal, it depends. My buddies at the Vanguard consider me an MSNBC liberal, even though they're quite fond of me. Others think that I'm basically a stone's throw away from communist. So I consider myself, if I'm liberal, I want to be as lefty as a liberal can get.
That makes
Centrist.
sense.
Yeah.
I think that we're both fair. I think everyone who's joining is fair. Is probably center left is probably the best. Okay, I'm sorry.
Don't ever
I'm
use the
sorry,
word
just-
center with you. Listen, if you want to describe yourself that way, that's fine. But when I hear center or centrist,
Right,
like
it
I
bothers
start
you
to have
so
an
much.
aneurysm. Like I can't do it.
Right. Are you in favor of Stalin, Josiah?
I am stalling until Econoboi and Pisco get here.
Nice.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah,
What's up,
what's up,
Pisco?
baby?
How do I sound?
You sound great.
You sound amazing.
to hear.
We'll let chat be the judge of that.
How are you guys doing?
I don't really care about how Stax is doing, but I'm doing fine.
Stax,
Thanks
this
for
is the first
asking.
time I met you. How you
Yeah,
doing?
how's it going, man?
Do you
Good
know
to
who I
meet
am?
you.
Do you know who this whole space
Yeah,
is?
I've seen you. I watch Destiny very occasionally, and I've seen you on there. I know you're a lawyer.
I am.
He's
That's
billing
about
us
it.
right now. By the way, the clock's
This is all
starting.
being billed.
Yeah.
That's about all I know about you. So
That's
Yeah,
awesome. So do you have any familiarity with Econoboi, or is this also a first time?
yeah, no,
interaction?
I know I follow his content pretty well, and we've had a few conversations.
He's kind of
before.
smart.
He's not
Yeah,
bad.
I like him a lot.
He's
Yeah.
not bad. Honestly, he's here purely for the sex appeal. Not,
By the
not
way,
gonna lie.
congratulations,
Just that big E.
Josiah, on 200,000 subscribers on
Yeah,
YouTube.
that's awesome.
Impressive
crazy.
numbers, my
I
friend.
appreciate it. I appreciate it,
impressive.
baby. I love it. I appreciate it. It's been super stressful. But we'll see where we can go.
How has the
Diving into
transition been?
it's been so for those who are curious, about like 3 weeks ago or something like that, I finally quit my day job and am doing this full time.
You're a content creator.
Yeah, and it's been better. It's been better. I really don't miss my day job, but it was tough because when you're used to like a particular type of brick and mortar situation, more conventional job,
Mhm.
you know.
What was
this
it
is-
like when the deep state introduced you to everyone?
Yeah. So honestly, that deep state, like that luncheon that I had after the transition, where you know the deep state took me into the dungeon, you know, like beneath the White House, the secret bunker where George Soros and Secretary Clinton and Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, obviously the real puppet masters behind the Biden regime. It was a great luncheon.
Listen,
Great.
I'm glad you got your kudos there, because you certainly don't get a lot of credit online standing Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's true. We got Econoboi. What's up, baby?
Got a full squad.
Hello. We're out here,
We
as
are.
the children say.
Yeah. So before we get started into anything, can you all confirm? Because it looks like shit's working, but can you all confirm on your ends that shit's working?
Well,
That
I
you're-
can confirm
working.
some shit was working, because I looked at my Twitter feed while I was getting my coffee, and I saw that I had tweeted, even though I never tweeted. And so apparently days ago, I gave you permission to control my social media feeds.
Oh,
so
the
I can
shit that
confirm
was
at least
on
that,
there.
that you are allowed to post on my Twitter.
No, so I think Stax, correct me if I'm wrong, but when
Mhm.
I go live, if your shit's paired to me, it automatically sends that announcement that things are going live.
Yeah, that's correct.
Perfect.
It's part of the program you're set up with.
Yeah, part of the
Okay.
program and part of the scam to get access to our accounts, Ruminate.
True.
Sorry,
Oh, dude.
pondering. I dead named you. My bad.
By the way, Pisco and Econoboy's DMs are much spicier than you would think. I already had access to Stax.
What do you mean by that?
The amount of dick pics that I have seen in Econoboy
Whoa.
and Pisco's DMs,
Yeah.
I mean, just sausage for days, man.
Oh, you mean
Not all
our
my
Twitter
own.
DMs?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of like how the Justice Department got Trump's Twitter DMs. I've heard. Have you read that?
No, I've
Wonder-
not. Is that a
Well,
thing?
I've heard that. Yeah.
Oh,
It seems like Jack Smith is really doing his job. getting after the whatever messages he was sending to random accounts.
Man, so here's what I was thinking. So the idea was to go for like 90 minutes. Obviously, if people have to dip before or want to go longer, that's fine. I don't have anything concretely planned for the rest of the night, but like ballpark 90 minutes. And then, of course, in terms of topics, again, obviously flexible, but we had President Biden's State of the Union. We had that landmark Supreme Court decision with respect to the 14th Amendment. We also have the upcoming, immunity thing that I want to talk about. And then the economy as well, which I know Econoboi is not very familiar with the economy, but the rest of us can help like pick up the slack,
Econoboi, I thought you were going to say that inflation was over. It's still at 3%. Didn't you predict it would be normal within 3 months?
That's true. I did actually make that exact prediction. I am a hack.
And I'm happy to go wherever direction you want to start with. What are you most interested in the news?
So I feel like we've got to hit these as much as possible because I guess we'll start with the State of the Union because it's most topical, right? And then the other things I feel like are not quite as time sensitive. But the State of the Union speech will be increasingly less relevant with each passing day. The economy and the Supreme Court, being the way they are evergreen. Let's start with that. So Thursday, President Biden gave the State of the Union, and I think 32 million people viewed it, which is like a 20%, 18 to 20% increase from 2023. Wow. So he had a hell of a bully pulpit. And the flash polls during the State of the Union in the aftermath, pretty favorable. I think it was 64% favorability for the president. Now, to clarify, these things very rarely are permanent. Again, they're flash polls for a reason. But again, the immediate response was positive. So what do you all think of the State of the Union? I assume you were all good little Biden simps and deep state assets. You all watched it, right?
Biden's the kind of guy you've got to watch Biden on 1.5 speed for sure. You can't watch Biden at regular speed.
At 1.5 speed, he is a brilliant orator.
Exactly.
he still messed up the only name that he didn't need to get right that entire night.
Yeah.
So I don't care what speed you put on it. He had to get that name right, and he messed it up. My initial reaction to you, Josiah, is I would put even more hesitancy on your, reaction to the initial public assessment. I do agree that in terms of pundit assessment and in terms of what I thought, in terms of how he looked generally, it was good. But I think I've seen other flash polls of it being more positive for Biden in the past before. And so just as a comparative analysis, I don't really know that we should put that much weight into one, States of the Union generally, and two, the polling after States of the Union, especially since this one looked less than it was before. That said, in terms of the direction of the campaign being more aggressive, and in terms of Biden himself as a figure, he looked to be, I think, going in the right direction that I want to see him in. And so that's what gave me more comfort than the pundit spins in the polls.
What about you, Econoboi?
I mean, I think that one of the reasons why we may have seen increased viewership, one of the reasons why we may have seen like a relatively positive response from the State of the Union is because I think that the narrative about Biden having dementia and Biden being like completely insane has really taken off over the last 12 months. And I think that part of, the reason why people tuned in was in part to basically confirm either their priors or to just see whether or not that's true. And I think that one of the narratives that makes sense in terms of why we've seen such a reaction from this speech is the idea that the Republicans it seems like at every subsequent step in this campaign, they have tried to optimally fuck themselves in the most incredible way possible in terms of their chances of winning. And this is an example where I actually thought their strategy was great. Make Biden seem crazy, make him seem like he's got dementia. People aren't going to want to vote for somebody who's demented, right? But what somebody pointed out was that the Republicans effectively have set such a low bar for Biden doing anything right that, hey, this is some crazy guy with dementia who's stumbling over his words, slurring his speech, falling off bikes, tripping all over the place. The fact that he's able to actually, it turns out he doesn't have dementia. It turns out he can give, a speech for an hour and a half and not sound like a complete lunatic. People immediately react and say, oh, well, he's just simply not as bad as I was told by Fox News. And it turns out he sounds just like pretty much any other president we've ever heard of. He's just really, really old, right? Which is still kind of a problem. But certainly I think that can explain part of the relatively substantially positive reaction. It seems like pretty much every independent and Democrat says it was a pretty good speech, and some proportion of maybe Nikki Haley voters or something say, this guy sounds all right, right?
Yeah. So Stax, I know you've got family members and friends up in the region where you live who are anti-Biden. Do you think that maybe the
Very
State of the
conservative.
Union? Yeah. Do you think the State of the Union maybe pulled them over?
I doubt it, but I do think that this is honestly, it's well, the thing is about this State of the Union is I think it was so much more blatantly anti-Trump and anti-Republican than we've seen Biden in a while. He did, like, through the majority of the State of the Union, he consistently called out his predecessor, as he referred to Trump, just like not naming him explicitly, but also like taunting the crowd of Republicans, MTG, after the State of the Union, but even during, when the crowd was getting like really aggressive and things like that, he was taunting them in the middle of the speech. And I think that plays really well to the liberal base, who needs to be reminded a little bit about how awful Trump was. I think that we have a really collective short-term memory as a nation, and remembering what Trump was like, and what Trump did. I think Biden did a really good job of highlighting that.
Yeah, so he was criticized, obviously, during the speech that people said, listen, this was the most partisan State of the Union address ever uttered. It was divisive. It was aggressive. And I don't know if I entirely disagree with that. Obviously, they say divisive in the pejorative sense. But we'll see, again, how this bears out in the long-term polling, because, again, to my point, and Econoboi, or no, Pisco reiterated, there's no guarantee that this will manifest itself in sort of a permanent uptick, right? Because, again, historically speaking, it's just not been the case, even for other presidents. States of the Union, if delivered well, tend to poll high, and then it just kind of tapers out to reflect what the pre-State of the Union average was. It's probably to be the case here. But for me personally, as somebody who has wanted Biden to take a much more aggressive posture and kind of just match the times, I like this, because Biden, I think, has been one of the most reticent to, I guess, accept the fact that the era of bipartisan rhetoric, right, even though he got quite a bit done legislatively in a bipartisan way, in terms of the let's just all get along for the sake of the country, that rhetoric is dead, and it may not come back. And I feel that Biden, to my frustration, was one among the slowest to get with the program. And so I feel like in the past couple of weeks, from reports that I've read, he did an interview with the New Yorker. You had the State of the Union. You even have his campaign speeches starting in January of this year. He's been on Trump's ass. He's been calling Trump by his least favorite word, which is loser. Like, he's taking a much more aggressive posture. So what do you all think about that? Do you think that that's good? Do you think it's bad? Do you personally like it, but you think it's bad politics? What is your position?
Christopher Hitchens once said, politics is division by definition. And I, on the one hand, recognize that there are important bipartisan things that presidents and any member of the political branches should seek to get done. For example, the sort of some of the historic packages that were passed, to say nothing of other legislation that sort of didn't get through everyone's radar necessarily, but I'm thinking now about the Bipartisan Electoral Count Reform Act, things like that. So there are genuine, tangible things that we need bipartisanship for. But at the end of the day, these are the political branches. Am I offended or surprised that Biden was political? No. I don't really see much value, especially in this day and age, for the president just being this meek and mild, nonpartisan person on that stage. And the sort of questions about decorum, I think, are totally lost now in the era of Trump. And the sort of opposition that he was heckled multiple times, say nothing of Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so those don't really ring true to me. They kind of ring a little hollow, frankly. And if you look at any other country, I think about like the UK, for example, you look at their question time, they're all partisan. They're always partisan. These are the political branches. Now, I understand the president is different than the prime minister. He's supposed to rise and speak for the nation as a whole. And in recent memory, I think Biden has tried to make overtures to that effect. But if they're falling on deaf ears from MAGA, I don't think that he has an obligation to play into this one-sided rhetoric game.
Donald Trump said that Ted Cruz's wife was ugly
Yeah.
and that his dad killed JFK. Donald Trump has said Biden is demented and doesn't know what he's doing. Biden said John McCain was a bad war hero because he was captured and he didn't actually do anything, heroic, I guess.
Yeah,
by
he's
being
like,
captured.
I prefer my war heroes to not be captured. Yeah.
Right. Like any Republican who ever utters the phrase Joe Biden's too partisan needs to look into a fourth dimensional mirror to just delve into their own mind to understand the incredible hypocrisy. Because in the current dimension that we live in, they're clearly unable to do it. But it's just unbelievable that I can hear a Republican utter the phrase, Joe, that Joe Biden guy, he's too partisan. His rhetoric is too extreme. Who are you voting for, sir?
Right.
Who is your leader? Who's been your leader for the last decade? Come on now.
To put this in context, just to put some names to us, you have people like Newt freaking Gingrich, who I believe maybe not as much as Mitch McConnell, but was at least the genesis of the Republican obstructionism that we've seen. I think Gingrich was the one who tipped that first domino over during the Clinton administration. The McConnell ran with it, but you have people like Newt Gingrich. You have Kayleigh McEnany and others as well saying, are people really going to vote for this angry old man in November? Or are they going to go for
Joe
somebody
Biden's
who
dividing
strives
the
for
country? He's dividing the country.
Yeah.
It's one of these things that really frustrates me as Stax knows, because it's something I've bitched about incessantly, publicly and privately to him, because Stax, I don't want to misrepresent him. Stax, I know I bust your chops where I say that you want me to be nice to conservatives, but no.
There's a distinction that I make. I think that if you want to reach conservative civilians, I think that we should recognize that they're largely not vindictive. And that's something that's the rhetoric that I talk a lot about, like when I make videos. But I think there's a huge distinction when we look at conservative politicians, people like McConnell or obviously Trump. I think actively engage in who are vindictive, if that makes sense. And I think that should be called out for the rhetoric that it is.
Yeah. Well, I think Biden does, generally speaking, a good job of. I think it's always fine to be harsh on your direct political opponents, and I think at the point where, and to be fair, could be wrong. Now I don't know about you guys. I've heard a lot of Republicans say Democrats are groomers, and Democrats want to trans the kids, and Democrats do this and that. I don't personally hear a ton of politicians on the Democratic side say Republican voters. Republicans. Now, Biden he took a baby step in that direction by saying MAGA Republicans.
Right.
But at the same time, I think it would be probably more appropriate if if Republican politicians wanted to say, the socialist Democrats or something, or saying this or that. Obviously, that's the extreme wing of the party. And so for us to say, well, hey, the MAGA Republicans who most of whom say they would like if Trump was a dictator. Yeah, that's probably a toxic base of people. But you're totally right, Staxiom. When you're talking about average sort of suburban mom type, conservative leaning people, I don't really think that these people, contain a lot of the negative vitriol from Biden. Biden's typically careful to talk about specific political opponents. And then he did give the one speech where he talked about the MAGA Republican movement. But in that same speech, he talked about how, the MAGA Republican movement is a diversion from the normal Republican movement. And that,
if anything, he was too charitable. You're talking about the independence.
No, that's exactly right.
The 2023 Independence Hall speech. Yeah. In Philadelphia.
And he's made.
Oh, you mean Biden's Hitler speech?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Where the fucking, wait a minute. You know what I should have done?
When Dark Brandon was born.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, but that's right. I think that if any, and that's genuinely the case. From political commentators all the way down to, or all the way up to the highest ranking politicians. I can't think of a broad and offensive attack such that the Republicans would call Democrats groomers because we support gay rights. I mean, that's just completely ridiculous. It's very ugly, and I really, honestly speaking, I just don't see the same type of vitriol from the average Democratic politician. You might have some leftists on Twitter calling Joe Biden Genocide Joe or something. But again, when we talk about sort of the spiritual moral leaders of the movement. I just don't really see the same type of vitriol from Democratic leaders as Republican leaders.
Econoboi, I love you, and you know that. And listen, my sympathies are always going to be with you in any conversation about anything, including and especially
Hold
Democrats.
on,
versus
Pisco's about to
Republicans.
be wrong. Incoming.
But
Oh shit! Here we go.
But
Here we
let
go.
me just be real. I mean, like one of the main things that voters threw back at Hillary in 2016 was the basket of deplorables comment. There are tons of examples like this. We don't see them because we don't view them as particularly targeted in the same way that Republicans have an ear for them. But I think both sides do it. I'm not really going to get into the game of who does it more or less. I think Trump does it more, and it's more vindictive than Biden for sure. But in terms of the respective parties, what I have a problem with is when it crosses a line from the political arena into potential abuse of power. So there are realms in which I think that Biden should be apolitical. He should not be dictating the Department of Justice. If we were to find out, for example, that he was pressuring the Attorney General to go after Trump, even though I believe Trump needs to be prosecuted for his crimes, I would think that's inappropriate. I would think that's impeachable from Joe Biden.
Can I ask you a quick clarifying question as to that, Pisco? So, okay. So we have no evidence, obviously, that President Biden has pressured or directed any of the like particular prosecutions.
I think that's fair, yes.
In the Department of Justice. But we have heard people say off the record or like on conditions of anonymity that Biden is pissed at certain aspects of Garland's performance. So do you count that? Like if it gets exposed to the press that the president is displeased with his attorney general, do you consider that improper?
No, I don't. If there were evidence that Joe Biden was like wanting that to be spread so that it would be heard by the Department of Justice, if you could show, hey, I'm saying this, that I'm frustrated with you, and I'm telling you this wink, wink, nudge, nudge, because I know you're going to release it out to the public, that would be one thing. And I would put that in the category of pressuring for sure. I'm not going to let you get away from your malignant intent because you have this little cute way of doing it. But I don't think that just people expressing what the president said to them, it necessarily falls into that category without more evidence that, hey, I want to have this message be delivered out to the public so that the Department of Justice actually changes what they're doing. And I think you have other kind of more substantive evidence of that, where he didn't interfere with the Her report. He
didn't assert executive privilege. Yeah.
He has stopped himself from directly interfering with prosecutions into his own son, some of which I think are highly suspect and questionable. And not to say anything about the investigations into Trump, where there's no evidence, and the Attorney General and others have spoken on the record saying that there has been no pressure from the White House, and I appreciate that. So I don't think that there's evidence of that, and I do think there's evidence of Trump doing that. And that's why I'm calling for a special counsel or an inspector general's report to find out what's going on with the Smirnov guy and what was the origin of that investigation and what role, if any, the DOJ or or Rudy Giuliani or any other agent of Trump had in the political persecution of any of the Bidens. Because I do not think that abuse of power is okay, no matter who's doing it.
So before I do want to get into specifics about, again, Trump's legal situation and also the Supreme Court too.
Sure,
but I will say, with respect to, your response to Econoboi, here's my beef. Yes, the comment from Secretary Clinton back in 2016, in which she said, there are two baskets of Trump supporters. One basket is this, and then the other basket is, a basket of deplorables. Here's my problem with that. It's been 8 years since that comment has been articulated, and Republicans still won't shut the fuck up about it. Meanwhile, to Econoboi's point, you can't go 1 week without a prominent Republican politician, be it Trump or Marjorie Taylor Greene, referring to the Democratic Party as a party of groomers and pedophiles. And so my frustration is, it's like, I'm not saying that you can't wag your finger and say, Hillary, you shouldn't have painted with such a broad brush, but Republicans do it more frequently, and more Republicans do it, period. So it's like, from every vector and mode of analysis, the Republicans are objectively worse. And my problem is they're graded on a curve. And I can't abide that. That's something where I feel like we all have an obligation to point that out. Like, hey, listen, if you're going to clutch your pearls about civility politics, fine and fair enough. But let's not pretend that Democrats are worse than Republicans or even as bad. So I feel like any honest accounting or any honest reckoning of the uncivil language used occasionally by Democrats, it has to be met with, okay, Republicans do it more Republicans do it, and Republicans say worse shit. Hillary Clinton said 50% of Trump supporters are deplorables. Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying all Democrats are groomers and pedophiles. All is worse than 50, and groomers and pedophiles is worse than deplorables.
Hey, listen,
So-
your point is well taken, and that's where my intuition is as well. The only thing is I want to make sure the audience is aware. My ear is tuned for it because I am left wing and because I do support Joe Biden. And so I have an ear for the kind of comments that I would think are absolutely in that category. But all I'm saying is I don't come from the vantage point necessarily of the Republican or the MAGA Republican who can feel very ostracized by some of the language that Democrats use. Not to say that that's justified or that it's equal on both sides, but just to say, hey, both sides do it, and me, I only have an ear for what I have an ear for.
How did Democrats get the reputation for being special snowflakes? I have to understand how this happened, because how the hell is it that the average Republican politician is calling Democrats groomers and pedophiles and this and that, and we just take it, oh, whatever, crazy Republicans, what are you gonna do? They're the anomaly. Meanwhile, you say, hey, it seems like half of these Trump voters are actually pretty fucking crazy in terms of the shit that they believe, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, you're dividing the country. I can't believe you would say such a thing. MTG's running ads with guns shooting at Democrats and policy proposals. We have multiple Republican congressmen calling for national divorce. I just like it to what do you call it? To Josiah's point, like I just think it's not unreasonable to say, I understand I'm a Democrat, I understand I'm a left-leaning person, but it just really feels like there's a serious double standard in how we evaluate people's rhetoric. I mean, we talk about grading Trump on a curve.
No doubt.
John Oliver, he made the point early on in Trump's presidential campaign that Trump, it's almost like a bed of nails. He says so many crazy things. He says so much stupid shit that it just kind of horizontally distributes out. And that means that each subsequent sort of marginal impact of what he says go down. I totally understand that psychological nature of what he's saying, but we can't discount like how incredibly fucking crazy the Republicans have become relative to the neocon movement, relative to the Tea Party movement, relative to the Gingrich era sort of Republican landslide. It's quite a different base and quite a different sort of stock of politician that we have today.
On that, I totally agree, Econoboi, in terms of the general things that the MAGA Republicans are saying versus the general things that Democrats and left-wing people are saying. I totally agree. I think it's any Republican who supports Trump after what happened with him trying to steal the election, I think I would put in that camp of this is beyond the pale. This is just gross. It's disgusting and worse than maybe anything Democrats have said in recent memory. So just supporting Trump because of what happened in the 2020 election. So on the general positions, viewpoints of MAGA Republicans, I totally agree. I was limiting my comments more of like the aspersions made of the other side. And I agree, on my ear, I hear it more, and I think that it's worse in nature and more in time by the other side. I just know that I have a feeling, which is I've spoken with Republicans and MAGA people who are very sensitive, and to your point about the snowflake, very sensitive to certain comments that might seem anodyne to like us, but to them meant a lot and was really painful. But again, not to justify it anyway, just given the other perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make a comment that I like the bed of nails analogy is very potent to me. Like, I do think that this is the third presidential election where Donald Trump is the leading Republican nominee. And 9 years ago, all of his comments seemed crazy and insane. And how often did you hear, oh, this is going to be the nail in the coffin for Trump? And I think that we've all just been so numb to his insane rhetoric and insane policies. And I don't know what else to say, like crazy personality traits as well, like the cult leaders that just follow him around. I don't know.
You don't like the My Pillow guy?
He's saying someone. Don't let him fool you.
Can we do a fun pause? I want everyone's most, I don't know if this is self-reporting or like your favorite MAGA personality that you loved, even though you understand they're MAGA, they're crazy, but you love them for some reason.
Honestly, Mike Lindell, just
Is your
because,
favorite?
and honestly, I despise
Really?
the guy like most MAGA cultists until I saw him. He did an interview with Jimmy Fallon where he's standing in a claw machine, like a giant claw machine thing, and he's making fun of himself. And it was actually like, after that, and I was talking with Luke Beasley about this, like I don't know where I was on Lindell prior to that, if he was like deliberately grifting or if he himself in a way is a victim of Trump. And I actually err more towards the victim thing, not to absolve him from culpability because he also signal boosts, Trump's lies, but I get the impression that Mike Lindell is genuinely mentally unwell and was a genuinely cheerful person prior to MAGA. So I don't know. He's probably the one where I'm just like, oh,
for me, for me, it's got to be Rudy Giuliani. And the reason I say Rudy,
that's crazy.
The reason I say Rudy is not only because he's completely insane, but also because you have to with Rudy, you have to think to yourself, like, how could it get lower, right? How could his reputation and his legacy be destroyed even more than it is today? But then the next day happens and he finds a way. Like, he finds a way to just completely topple any amount of legitimacy or legacy he ever could have had. I mean, because we have to remember, like, Rudy Giuliani, he was the guy who ended the mob in New York, and he was the
America's mayor during 9/11.
America's mayor. That was the phrase that I was looking for.
He pioneered RICO,
Exactly, right? Like, this was a genuinely at one point a relatively broadly beloved politician. And into his
by the way, hang on, Pisco, by the way, as an attorney, admires Rudy Giuliani. Just considers
what? Wait, what?
I mean, looks up to Giuliani, considers him like the gold standard of the legal profession. Just to Econoboi's point, I'm just saying.
I've heard Pisco say that before, but like, we've all heard it. But like, that's the thing, like, about that's the thing about Trump and his almost utility to the political process, is that I think that Trump has shown above anything else. And we don't know this about Democrats because we haven't had quite the tests that the Republicans have had, to be fair, which it could be the case with Democrats one day. But I think what he showed is that there's a lot of politicians, and we knew this in the back of our heads, that are really just completely fucking liquid in terms of their positions. Like, they will fill whatever cup they need to in order to win and fit the form that they need to. I mean, look at guys like Lindsey Graham. He started out as super anti-MAGA. He's an example like Rudy Giuliani, where
when you said Giuliani was liquid, Econoboi, I thought you meant when he was melting at
his dye.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, Giuliani's the best case of being like a sad person who's flip-flopped, but he's also like a really embarrassing person. Like, he seems like he can't go outside without embarrassing himself. But there's so many politicians like that. I mean, look at Chris Christie, right? Who he's trying to save face now, saying he was super anti-MAGA. Oh, look, I ran this campaign talking about I hate Trump, this and that. But, who was one of the most major endorsements that dropped out in 2016? It was Chris Christie. I believe it was after he lost New Hampshire. He endorsed Donald Trump very fervently. And, well, a different time, you can say what you want, but like, we can even look at the interpersonal relationship that they had, where like there's clips of one thing about Trump is that he's very he doesn't like when anyone else steals the spotlight. And he doesn't like particularly with Chris Christie, it was reported that one of the reasons why he didn't pick Chris Christie to be his vice president was not only because Chris Christie had a strong personality, but also because Chris Christie was fat, and he felt like Chris Christie would make him look bad because he's so fat. And there were speeches where Chris Christie would introduce Trump, and Trump would literally tell him, "Yeah, get out of here," like that, like just get out of here right after the speech was over.
Yeah,
and Chris Christie's response was, "You got it." And it's like, dude, you guys are all cowards. And Donald Trump showed how cowardly the average politician is when they're faced with a crazy popular political figure that the average politician...
That's why you like Giuliani?
Well, no. That's why I think Trump provides utility to the political process. It shows just how cowardly the average politician will be. And to some extent, it's a reflection of our democratic system. But it's sad how many Republicans who were good, strong Republicans, even Mitt Romney, who was going to dinner with Trump because he thought he would become Secretary of State. Mitt Romney was. And so no matter, all these Republicans, I think, are willing to, take whatever they need to in order to get a position of power. And the Democrats might be the same way. We just haven't had quite the same test as the Republicans have. Maybe one day Kanye West will be our nominee and we'll have to really reckon with that. But, until then,
he won't be a Democrat. I promise you that.
Yeah, I mean, until then, Trump proves, I think, quite just how paper thin the principles are of the average politician, at least in the Republican side.
What about you, Stax?
I would probably say, I don't know if Alex Jones counts as a MAGA personality.
Yes.
Probably because he wasn't a part of the administration at all. But I don't know. I watch a lot of Republican shows. I tune into Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson every once in a while, and there is single-handedly none that is more entertaining than Alex Jones. I also think he has I think he wraps around the other side where he actually provides a lot of utility for leftists because they can just point to him and go, look at this insane human being. And they go, yeah, obviously the right's insane. Like, I think he provides so much. Like, Ben Shapiro seems really logical and really thoughtful. And a lot of the big conservative pundits seem to as well, or seem to, right? Emphasis on seem to. But I think Alex Jones is so obviously single-handedly insane that he's a really good person to just point to. Yeah, I have watched a couple of his shows for fun.
Speaking of wrapping around, and I do want to toss it back to you because
Sure.
I know we have to talk about things. But speaking of wrapping around, my favorite MAGA personalities are the MAGA rappers who have you seen them on Twitter where they have?
Yeah.
the
Are we talking about
uploaded
Tom
raps?
McDonald or?
I don't know their names, but I do know
okay.
that there are many MAGA like hip hop rappers, and they recently did a video. It was like "We Are the World" type video with like Michael Flynn, and it was so deliciously awful. So those are my
What?
favorite MAGA personalities. But Josiah, sorry to interrupt.
No. Listen, I mean, We Are the World with Michael Flynn. Jesus. So what's funny is I actually watched a good We Are the World documentary on Netflix. They actually recorded the fucking thing in a single night. It's amazing.
Really?
And so now I'm imagining all like the behind the scenes corralling involved in a MAGA rap video. Tom McDonald's the one who did Ben Shapiro. That duet with Ben Shapiro, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
also, to be fair, I'll defend my Rudy Giuliani pick as well. Rudy Giuliani has the record for, I think, the most bizarre video in the history of politicians, which was
which one?
Giuliani dressed in drag, and I believe with Trump, and I believe Giuliani and I believe. Oh yeah, that's right. Trump. No, yeah, Trump motorboated Giuliani dressed in drag like 20 years ago. This is a real video.
You haven't seen that, Josiah?
No, I've not seen that. No,
actual
this is real.
That happened, and it is one of the most bizarre. It's just funny to think, man, those guys. That Trump was the president. He'll be the president 20 years after that video.
Yeah, Jesus. So
I thought you were talking about the.
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I think you're talking about the Sacha Baron Cohen.
That's the one I was thinking, where he's playing pocket pool.
No, this is Giuliani in full
crazy.
Drag, as
both.
a drag queen, going up to Trump and Trump motorboating him.
Well, listen, thank God he wasn't trying to read a book to kids. Otherwise, Republicans wouldn't know what to do, right? If he was in drag for Drag Time Story Hour.
The original drag queen.
Yeah. Well, Giuliani probably has to read. I'm not sure if he can do so at this point because that guy has been, let's see, hasn't he suffered multi-million-dollar judgments, Pisco?
Oh, yeah. He's actually, I think he's in a bankruptcy proceeding. So a lot of these, when there's, I don't know anything about bankruptcy. You should get your own bankruptcy lawyer. I don't know anything about it.
Practice anymore right? in New York.
He had some department proceedings. I actually don't know now I'm not remembering if they've been completed yet, but a lot of the cases have been shunted over to the bankruptcy court because basically when you go bankrupt, a bunch of your cases will get funneled before the bankruptcy court. Again, I'm not a bankruptcy attorney. Go get your own. But so the idea is like a lot of the defamation stuff and other related civil actions have been are still ongoing, and he has a bunch of judgments against them that he is not paid.
Yeah, he jumped the shark as far as I'm concerned when that Four Seasons press conference where it was Four Seasons landscaping. That's just such a beautiful, iconic Rudy Giuliani moment.
It's crazy how much of Trump's presidency. Sorry to interrupt.
No, keep going.
It's crazy how much of Trump's presidencies were like had some aspect of like a genuine like comedy routine to it. Like there are a couple of his quotes which like genuinely made me laugh out loud. Like when he was talking to the 5-year-old on Christmas and he like said he still believes Santa. He's
legitimately the most quotable president there has ever been.
It's so good.
Like Teddy Roosevelt and FDR. Like he
for real
is the most quotable.
Well, you're comparing him to again, all we have to fear is fear itself, and ask not what you or what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And then we have Trump going, this hurricane was one of the wettest in terms of water ever on record.
Point of water.
I mean, from the standpoint of water, at least. I mean, again, see, that's the other thing that kind of frustrates me. Like when we're talking about, which MAGA personality is the standout, and chat's like coming up with a gazillion because it really is hard because you've got half of the Republican Congress right now. You've got Tim Scott, you've got Lindsey Graham, you've got Ted Cruz, you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, you've got Lauren Boebert, et cetera, and so forth, each of whom could have their own, like we could devote an entire episode to their hypocrisy and their craziness and their spinelessness. But then also, just for Trump in general, there again, going back to him being graded on a curve, the thing for Biden's State of the Union, that the bar was so lower that he just had to clear it in terms of delivering a speech effectively because there's so many questions about his mental acuity. But the thing that I keep telling people, because I feel like we have ceded the ground to this, is that poll after poll after poll shows that a majority of Americans, not to the same extent, but have serious questions about Trump's mental fitness. And, then it gets back to, we're talking about Trump quotes. I mean, I don't know. I know Trump was highly educated. I think he went to Wharton. Was that right? Did he go to Wharton School of Law
That's
or
right.
something like that? Yeah.
Business.
I think he got a BA.
School of business.
Yeah, he had a business degree.
So I'm sure the guy is not like an idiot, in terms of like IQ or whatever. But everyone
C's
who's
get
ever
degrees,
worked for him,
boys.
say what?
C's get degrees, boys. Never forget.
Very true, touche. But like everybody who's worked for Trump in a reasonable, like in a meaningful capacity when he was president, like his former chiefs of staff, secretaries of state, they all say he's an idiot and that he's profoundly uncurious. And the guy is a gaffe machine as much as Biden. So to me, that's the other frustrating thing, is that's a double standard manifest there.
Who's
Trump
grading
says,
on a curve now? Sorry, I just think Trump is so much worse. I don't know.
I mean, I knew people,
and crazy stuff he's done.
I mean, I knew people in the intelligence world who said that it was extremely difficult to brief Trump. That like Trump had, it was hard to basically get him to understand anything and pay attention to anything. He very uncurious, like you said. There was that I think it was in his first few days as president. He instituted a policy where his briefs had to be one page and they had to have lots of pictures because he just really genuinely speaking genuinely speaking, like he's not. And to be fair, like I don't think Trump is like a bumbling idiot. I had a conversation with my conservative friend, and he said, look, I think Trump's probably above average IQ. And I was like, that's definitely not true. But I wouldn't say he's like a bumbling idiot. I would say maybe he's like a standard deviation below the rest of us. Like he's just kind of stupid. And I think that when a lot of times people will make the fair comparison. They'll say, look at a video of Biden talking from 20 years ago and look at a video of Biden talking today. And they'll say, look, Biden's just a lot slower. Like he's thinking slower. He's not thinking as quickly. He's not as sharp as he used to be. And that's like undoubtedly true. I think if you compare and contrast Biden when he was 60 to Biden when he's 80 today, there's definitely a difference. But at the same time, if you look at a video from Trump when 20, 40 years ago, there is also a clear difference. Trump from the 1980s sounds extremely articulate compared to what he is today. And again, I'm not comfortable saying he has dementia, but like, when you're almost 80 years old, almost everyone's going to be a little bit slower than they used to be, right? I mean, that's just kind of a natural part of aging.
You can't say that he has dementia because he remembered 5 words on a test he took 6 years ago.
TV, woman,
person,
elephant, person. Yeah. But like it's fascinating because again, I've made this.
I love it. Hold on. I love that part where he's like, I got the best score on the mental test, and it's they say it's a difficult test. They say it's a difficult test, and then I think it was like CNN that was like, this was the test, and it was like, which one of these is a giraffe?
One of them is like, what is the date today?
It's literally Peter Griffin with the easier questions, and that one you know what I'm talking about?
No, for real.
Yeah,
for real. I mean, because it's not an IQ test, right? It is literally to test if you
are mentally challenged. I don't know,
or if you have some sort of like
way,
but if you have some sort of cognitive impairment, like related to dementia or Alzheimer's, right? And so the thing is, though, if you go back, like you said, you don't even have to go. Like you go back and watch Conan O'Brien interviews or Oprah Winfrey interviews or Larry King interviews with Donald Trump in even the early aughts. There is a noticeable change, because I'm with you. I mean, I don't deny the fact that Biden is clearly, he suffers from some sort of age-related slowness, right? But I don't think it's dementia or Alzheimer's or anything else. He's
look at
an
your
old
euphemisms.
guy.
Those are deep state euphemisms.
Right. That's right, exactly. I'm reading off the note card right now. No, they would never. The deep state would never permit this.
Right, you mean brainwash?
I am off. I am outside of the line. I'm coloring outside the lines right now by even saying this. But the question is whether there's competence there. And for me, if Biden has lost a step in terms of verbal agility, I think it was Lawrence O'Donnell who said on MSNBC a couple of weeks ago that, believe it or not, we don't elect presidents specifically to make speeches. They are head of state, right? So speech making and trying to unify the country, that is important, but they are chief executive first, right? So they're an administrator, they're head of government first and foremost. And so for me, the question
take a
is,
little issue with that there, Pondering. I love you, and I mean
all right, go ahead. What's up?
And listen, I totally agree that part of being a good president absolutely is policy and getting good people in charge. But I would say a huge part of it, not an insignificant part, a huge part is rallying the country and putting forth your vision and getting the country on board and on the same page. Because frankly, it's a unified head of state who, when the time calls for it, needs to be able to speak candidly to the American people and get them on board for policy ends. So in other words, you could have the best policy in the world, but if you can't get the people on board, what use is it? Or you could have the best results in terms of the bipartisan infrastructure, most investment, all that stuff. And I agree with all those policy achievements. And part of the struggle has been for the administration to properly, I think, sell their record. But if you cannot communicate that to the American people, what good are you? In other words, perception in some ways is reality. And so I do think that Biden's, even though I would vote for Biden if he couldn't talk, if he was mute, if he was like, over Trump, right? Because I think Trump is such an existential danger. But I think that any kind of problem in communication is a substantive criticism, because a huge part of the role is communication with the American people.
So let's try to parse this out. So again, as head of state, yes, there's a communicative element there, but I don't take it as far as I feel like a lot of people do, which they evaluate the strength of Biden's presidency based on his ability to give off the cuff answers or how often he does interviews. I want to be very clear about this. Biden, in my estimation, or any president, let's be very clear, any president in my estimation would still be fulfilling their obligations as head of state, head of government, and commander-in-chief of the armed forces if they gave one interview a year, because we have an entire apparatus devoted to communicating the president's agenda to the American people. You have a press secretary, you have surrogates and things like that. In fact, as a matter of fact, if I see the president in front of a camera every day conducting interviews, it's like, buddy, you need to be in the fucking situation room. You need to be behind the Resolute desk. I don't need to see you all the goddamn time the way Trump was omnipresent. And that's to me, Trump was an overcorrection as somebody who was a performer rather than an executive. And you can also tell based on how little he aged. That was something that was brought up recently too, which I thought was an excellent point. Trump did not physically age during his presidency. And that's how you know that he was not, actually engaged in the substance of running the country. And so to me, I hear you. Communication is important. But I would rank, or if I have to choose between a competent executive and a competent communicator, executive comes first, communicator is a distant second.
I think I'd agree with that. I'm just going to get a little pushback because I do think that Biden has had some failings in communicating some of what the great things that he's been doing. And so if it's not him, it's his surrogates, or if it's not them, it's maybe the media not reporting it. Someone's responsible because the message is not getting through, right? Econoboi, isn't the economy on the rebound? Aren't we doing better?
I think a good way to put it is that being a strong public speaker is probably like a necessary but not sufficient condition to be a holistically good president, because at the end of the day, I really don't. I mean, unfortunately, for the people out there who just cannot speak, or who are mute, or who are deaf and can't speak very well, compared to someone who doesn't have a hearing impairment or something like that, I really don't see a future for anybody like that to be elected to be president, because communication is pretty important. And of course, that's very ableist of the average American voter. Of course, that shouldn't be the case, but I would say that certainly it is the case that if you're not a strong communicator, you could have the best ideas in the world. You could, generally speaking, I mean, you could be the best president ever if people would actually elect you. But if you can't communicate in an effective way, you're probably just never going to get there, right? And I think that Biden and Trump have their own sort of, I would say, strengths and weaknesses in terms of their communication ability in general. So it's not like clear that. It's not clear to me that when they speak, Biden or Trump particularly win over people compared to the other one, right? So
they do when they're funny, and I think one of the best parts about now, if we're getting to the speech, the substance of it, I think Biden was funny, and I think that's one of the reasons why I at least thought the speech was very good. And if we're grading anyone on the curve, if we're grading Biden on the curve in this public speaking, I thought it's a really great speech, like a fantastic speech as far as Biden is concerned, because he doesn't always have the most, and even then he had some difficulty sometimes in fluidity and getting everything across, but he was able to extemporaneously respond to like dissent and to heckles and stuff that sounded really good and in a really funny way. And I think that we need to see more of that, because Trump can also be very funny and can also extemporaneously come up with these like little funny asides. And I think that people relate to that. They think that like they're more human if they're able to do those. That's why I thought or Senator Britt's response was so alien. Maybe it resonated with some people, and I'm just like totally in a bubble.
I don't want to out Stax, but he said he was a huge fan of it.
You love
I
this
liked
speech.
it.
You love this speech. All right, give us your take, Stax.
What?
One of those aliens. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, no, he hated it.
But yeah, to your point, I mean, there was also a few interviews that he did after the State of the Union. When he made that face to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and that kind of went a little viral because I think everyone recognized him as kind of one of those, like one of your old grandpas who would just like make fun of the kids who were acting a little silly, but like in a kind of like disparaging way still. To Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I don't know. I think that he has put on a new, I don't know. He has a little bit of a new face recently. And I think that he stepped into this job really hoping to be a bridge builder. And I think that something that might have radicalized him a bit is what happened with the border deal, where Republicans said that they wanted something and then voted against it. And I think that resonates with him.
It was a good moment in the speech as well, because I think that there, in terms of substance, there's not much ground for MAGA conservatives to stand on in the critique of this bill, in my opinion, as someone who has done at least a little bit of immigration in their pro bono, actually quite a few cases. I know that there are exceptional powers that the president has, but one of the most, like, I would say, radical things that this bill proposed was just this procedureless throwing people back across the border, and being able to remove people summarily. That is a power that is incredibly strong. And because usually, even if once you cross the border, you're in America and you're entitled to certain procedures, even if it's expedited removal procedures, you're going to be heard in front of an administrator, and maybe you can even appeal it to an administrative judge, even if you are in the worst cases, right? This is talking about just throwing people back across the border. It's a huge power. And Biden, he saw the bluff and he called it, and it was a very, very strong bill. And the shot of, oh my God, I forgot his name, Senator from Oklahoma, Langford, of nodding along and saying that's true when Biden said that this would be it would help a lot with the border. That was a great moment for Biden.
Well, where he's blinking in Morse code, like I would like to be like cheering and raising my fist, but I can't. Trump has me on a leash, so.
Well, I think that he was Senator Langford was beside himself, probably about as much as the Democrats were, because he was relatively strong in defending the bill on the sort of conservative merits on the news, and the bill still ended up getting shot down. I think that what can be said about Biden is that I think he did learn from his time as vice president that you really can't work with Republicans to an incredible degree like you could have in the 90s or in the 80s when he had taken office a little bit earlier on in his tenure. Because Biden, I mean, he immediately went for reconciliation half a dozen times when he was in office for the first 2 years with the unified government. And I think that that's a much stronger record to run on, frankly, than Obama had when he was running for re-election.
Econoboi, to clarify, I'm sorry, when you say reconciliation, I'm curious because there's that procedural term reconciliation where you basically pass a bill with just 51 votes, or do you mean reconciliation as politically sentiment, like to when he basically pushes forward huge spending packages and huge priorities through the procedural reconciliation? Yes, gotcha.
Because. Yeah, because like one thing that just completely plagued Obama's entire presidency was not taking advantage of that first 2 years to the greatest possible extent, where he could have passed federal abortion protections, right? He could have ended the filibuster, right? He could have been a lot more aggressive with pushing for Obamacare a lot earlier. He could have passed a bigger stimulus. He just didn't do all those things in the name of bipartisanship. How many Republicans voted for any of that? None, right? It was just a complete waste of time. And Biden, he worked even to get the bipartisan infrastructure bill done early on in his presidency, but he also passed a lot of other stuff. And the reason I say that that's a stronger record to run on is because it shows you, like, holistically, like, hey, if you elect Democrats, not if you elect Republicans, if you elect Democrats to office, we can actually get a lot of shit done, right? Look at all the stuff he was able to get done, even with Cinema and Manchin blowing a lot of shit up. So I think that's a really strong.
Econoboi, you want to hear the black pill though? Here's the black pill.
Give me the black pill.
The black pill is between 2021 and 2024. The Republican Party has changed even more than it was in 2021. And I think if you had the same bill up for consideration in 2021, it would have passed with many Republican votes, and enough to pass the filibuster.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think since the start of Biden's presidency and the end of Biden's presidency and throughout all of Trump's presidency, the Republican Party has become more and more MAGA. There has not been a moment in the descent of the Republican Party into MAGAism since 2017, 16, 17, where there's been a reversal. It's always gone towards MAGA.
keep in mind, like when we're talking about the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we're talking about like a handful of Republicans in the Senate voting for it. We're not talking about a substantial number of House members. And, that's been a trend basically from 2016 on, where Trump has gone through a pretty deliberate filtering process where 2018, 2020, 2022, we saw wave after wave after wave of moderate Republicans being primaried by Trump-endorsed candidates, and a lot of them ended up losing their general elections. But hey, in terms of the Republicans left around, the proportion of them that are like really crazy MAGA conservatives is a lot higher. And so I totally agree with you, Pisco. I think there's very little room for sort of anti-Trump Republicans in the Senate or the House anymore. I think literally the one sort of, I'll say the two structural exceptions would be the senator from Maine or the senator from Alaska.
Yeah.
Because
their categories
they have
of their own. Yeah.
And Collins. Yeah.
Because they have ranked choice voting, right? I think that's the reason that you'll see maybe room for moderate senators from those states. But I think that in pretty much every other state, I don't think that this is a problem
and
that will
also
be alleviated anytime soon.
There's a bit of a Manchin thing going on here too with Maine, and Maine, Susan Collins is a bit of a known commodity. They know her and they like her. Even liberal people in Maine like Susan Collins, which is weird to me, especially given how she voted on some of the Supreme Court nominees and what happened later with Roe v. Wade. But yeah, it's still the case.
Well,
I'm sure if you polled Maine, they like her. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right-wingers have been trying to primary Lisa Murkowski for like 15 years now, and they haven't really been able to succeed. Yeah. And so, especially with the ranked choice voting, I mean, Alaska has a Democrat in the House representing them, right? And so ranked choice voting really does help, I would say, at least in our current environment, like moderate the type of candidates. And those are just the two states that have it. And so, yeah, I think I agree that I think that, and I don't know what happens after Trump. If Trump decides, if Trump wins, it's only going to get worse. But if Trump loses in 2024, I don't know if the Republican Party will.
I don't think there's a pivot coming.
I don't think it'll. Yeah, I think maybe 2032 or something. Like at some point it'll happen because they're going to get 40% of the vote in an election and decide they just have to at some point. But
this is the thing. The GOP is not an introspective party, because this is the thing that frustrates me. I mean, I'm not saying that some sort of epiphany is impossible. But to me, it's breathtaking that it hasn't happened yet, because Trump won via the Electoral College, which is a legitimate win, but there's no mandate associated with Trump and Trumpism. He lost the popular vote to Secretary Clinton by 3 million votes, won by the Electoral College. Then he lost in 2018. He lost in 2020, 2021 with the Senate runoffs. He lost in 2022, 2023. So it has been one L after another. And so that's, I'll be on a WIC panel sometime this week talking about, is Trump good for the Republican Party? Objectively speaking, he's been terrible for it. If you want to hang your hats on appointing those 3 Supreme Court justices, but that was McConnell and the Federalist Society. That had nothing to do. You could have put any Republican in Trump's position and they would have rubber stamped whatever appointment there.
But he's playing a different game than you. He's not playing the game of general election wins. He's playing the game of primary wins. He's playing the game of winning and dominating the Republican Party.
Yeah, but the problem is you still have to win the general, and Trump's under Trump, the Republican Party's record with that respect has been awful. And so that's the thing. It's like that's where the GOP's epiphany, the fact that it's taken this long and hasn't happened yet, is really embarrassing. That's why when people say, well, it's got to happen.
You mean for the non-Trumpers who do care about winning and being
sure.
in power. Yeah, okay.
Well, quite frankly, even for the Trumpers as well, right?
Okay,
like this is even for the Trumper, the MAGA Republican, I don't know why the fuck you care about winning a primary if you don't win the general. The primary doesn't get you the office that you're seeking. So who gives a shit, right? So if I'm a MAGA Republican and I just nail the primary, but I lose to a moderate Democrat in the general, I still lost. The Democrats won, I lost. And so there's no matter how you slice it, the inevitable road, at least so far, the record has reflected that it's just been one defeat after another.
Unless you don't have a preference as between a moderate deep state Republican and a moderate deep state Democrat, which I don't think it's true of all MAGA, but I think it's true of some significant portion of MAGA. They have an indifference. They view
the uniparty.
They view it as a uniparty, part of the same swamp. And so if you're, I don't really care if Mitt Romney or Joe Biden wins the election, because to me, they're two sides of the same coin.
I think that the issue is that the reason I do say it's going to come to a head at some point is because I don't really see a reason to believe that the demographics of the country will become substantially more favorable or remain the same for Republicans, even going into the next decade, right? So, like, I think what I mean by that is when you look at the sort of political ideological bend of each generation, it seems like millennials and Gen Zers particularly are almost like stubbornly left-leaning, right? Where millennials are not becoming they're becoming slightly more conservative in the sense that they're becoming like far left Democrats. Now they're moderate Democrats, but they're not becoming literally conservatives like Gen Xers and boomers have done at the same ages. And that these curves are seriously discontinuous. Part of that could be growing up during the Great Recession. Part of that could be growing up during the Tea Party movement. Part of that could be growing up during Obama. And Obama was such an inspirational political figure for so many young millennials at the time, right? I'm not really sure, but the point is that seems to be the case. And I think especially in 10 years when you have like so many more boomers pass away and such a higher proportion of the voting base is going to be millennials, like I think at some point there will be a presidential election where Democrats win 58% of the vote, win 60 Senate seats, win 300 seats in the House, and literally pass like every conceivable Democratic priority. And the Republicans literally take such a fat L that they just have to change. They either face electoral annihilation or they have to change. And I don't know if that's 2032. I don't know if it's 2036, but it just seems like the demographics of the country just simply will not allow for this type of ideology to go forward into the future unless we see the younger generation like basically all of a sudden become substantially more conservative than they are now, which they just aren't trending in that direction.
So real quick, I want to answer this question. Josiah, are you sure that he's objectively bad? How do you know the results wouldn't have been worse with another flag bearer? The reason that I think it's reasonable to conclude that Trump has been electoral poison for the GOP is because when you control, like you take his endorsements. So Trump makes lots of endorsements, but if you don't count incumbents and you count endorsements that Trump makes that are non-incumbent and deviate from what the establishment Republican Party recommend in terms of endorsements, Trump had a very high loss rate for candidates that he endorsed. Then you see as well with like more moderate Republicans doing reasonably well in swing districts. You have 18 relatively moderate Republicans in districts that President Biden won. So the general principle is, at least in this election, the past few election cycles, is more moderate Republicans do better in the general election than MAGA Trump Republicans. I don't know. The Arizona race hasn't been decided yet, but you have Carrie Lake, who was endorsed by Trump. She lost the gubernatorial race, and she's favored to lose the senatorial race too. She was favored to lose it in a three-way with Kyrsten Sinema as the incumbent independent. But now that Sinema is out of the race and it's a 1v1, she's favored to lose that as well. MAGA as a general principle just does not do well in general elections. And I'm not saying don't take it seriously. I'm just saying that this idea that he pitches himself as this reinvigorator of the GOP. In certain respects, he is, but in terms of winning elections, no, he's not.
And if you want to, I guess, fight against Josiah's point, my question would be, can you point to a single election where you think that pattern hasn't been met? Where you think, so for instance, point to a moderate Republican. I'm thinking now of all the 2022 elections in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. Well, that's a good question. Okay, so as between Dr. Oz and who was the candidate against
Doug Mastriano?
Doug Mastriano, who would you consider to be more MAGA there?
I mean, Mastriano for sure, yeah.
Okay, but Oz is kind of like a little bit MAGA as well, right? And
Oz is kind of a wild card because he's like a celebrity style candidate like Trump.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be fair, like, Fetterman was kind of a wild card too. So
true. Yeah. I would be interested in elections in which there was both a MAGA candidate on the ballot and a less MAGA candidate, and to see the comparison between the two, and to point an example where Josiah's pattern hasn't held true. I think that would be an interesting.
I think there have been some pocketed examples, like for instance, if I'm not mistaken, I think New Hampshire is a decent exception to this, where New Hampshire has quite a Republican, quite a moderate Republican in office. Same thing with Vermont. Now, to be fair, I don't think that they've faced like serious primary challenges, but I want to say in the New Hampshire Senate election, this most recent one, I believe a MAGA Republican actually lost the primary to a more moderate one. But I mean, that's like the exception that proves the rule. Like it does seem like, to Josiah's point, it seems like certainly it's the case that if you are a Republican and you want to win your election, your first step is getting Trump's endorsement. And your second step needs to be trying to distance yourself from Trump in the general election so that you can actually win your election. Which is, to be fair, I mean, that's something that, again, like, I don't think Mitt Romney is like the worst Republican on the planet, but like he falls into this where like he worked to get Trump's endorsement when he ran for Senate. Then after the primary, he immediately starts criticizing Trump, and now all of a sudden he feels bulletproof. We see this pattern happen a lot with different like these moderate Republicans that are still left, where they still have to cater to Trump to some degree, right? So.
Yeah, no, 100%. They put themselves in a position, more so, in my opinion, than at any point in modern U.S. history the Republicans have, where their incentives to win the primary and their incentives to win the general are in direct opposition. They're mutually exclusive. As Econoboi says, you have to hug Trump to win the primary, and then you have to haul ass from Trump to have a shot of winning the general, just as a general principle. But at the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure that an epiphany is coming, just because, again, to me, it's like there should have been one already. And you need only look at McConnell. So Mitch McConnell, the longest serving, Republican leader in the Senate, is resigning from leadership in November, and then he's not seeking re-election in 2027. And McConnell, to me, when there's going to be a postmortem on his political legacy, I'd like to see what you all have to say about this. They're going to, I think, as much as him reshaping the federal judiciary and as him as eroding senatorial norms, I think he will be inextricably tethered to Donald Trump, politically speaking, because he made the cold and stupid calculus that he could direct Trump, use Trump, and then discard Trump when Trump was no longer politically viable. So I look at after January 6th, when Democrats wanted to impeach then President Trump, they asked for a speedy trial in the Senate. And McConnell, even though in the days afterwards he emphatically blamed Trump for January 6th, didn't want to give a trial, right? Because he was hoping to basically have his cake and eat it too. I don't want to make an opponent of Donald Trump yet.
He thought he was defeated. It's like,
right.
Without any spoilers, the Mountain and the Viper, for those of you who know that reference. One issue that I think a lot of Republicans and Democrats, and this is especially true of Democrats, is they underestimate their opponents. You can never underestimate your opponents. Don't be hysterical about Trump or anything, or MAGA or whatever. It recognizes the threat, and don't underestimate them. Mitch McConnell thought Trump was done. A lot of Republicans thought he was done, but he wasn't done. He still drew breath. He stood up, and he now dominates the Republican Party. So if you consider Mitch being an enemy of Trump, and I think in an interpersonal way, they're vying for the structure of power in the Republican Party. Now, in the general sense, he's been an ally because he's been complicit in the rise of Trump and Trumpism, even while trying to manipulate and use it for his own ends. But he was defeated by Trump because he underestimated Donald Trump. And so I think that everyone needs to stop underestimating this guy. This guy can absolutely win this election, and it's up to people really to convince each other and of your friends. And Stax says he has a bunch of conservative family members. Maybe they're not reachable, but
well, I don't know if it's just about underestimating Trump. It's also not about overestimating Republican primary voters.
True,
right?
Yeah,
because I think that unfortunately speaking, like what a lot of the analysis of like I think Staxiom mentioned it earlier, like how many times have we heard Trump is done after he said this, that, and this, right? And the issue is that we have to keep in mind that Trump's sort of institutional capture is of the mind of the median Republican primary voter. Now, it's not necessarily the mind of the median person who votes for a Republican in the general election, right? But there's a reason why his endorsement is so valuable. It's because Republican primary voters are MAGA conservatives. And there's like a huge disproportionately representative population of them that participate in the primary, that when you see polls that show that the Trump base is more enthusiastic than the Biden base, what that translates into is Trump has a lot more of a hold on, and Biden, to be fair, doesn't attempt to do this like Trump does, but Trump has a lot more of a hold on who can make it out of a Republican primary. And when we talk about all these crazy conservatives that got elected, every single one of them was voted for by Republican primary voters. That is who they prefer. I posted on Reddit. It was I don't know. It was like a political thread or something, and it was like, why isn't Nikki Haley doing as well as Donald Trump? And it's like, because Republican primary voters like Trump. They prefer him and his rhetoric and his insanity and his complete fucking crazy direction of the country. That's just what they want. Right. And, another sexist comment, another crazy thing Trump said, another crazy thing Trump did, another indictment, another fucking giant list of 100 things that Trump did that was crazy. This will be the time. This will be the moment when Republicans realize that Trump is crazy and vote against him. Like, no, it's not. They've already known this. That's priced in. Right. And we can't necessarily assume that in the short term, any one of these events, even as extreme as January 6th, is going to necessarily, clearly fundamentally change the opinions of Republican primary voters on Donald Trump.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Stax, and then I'm going to change
No,
the topic.
yeah, it's hard. It's hard when we're talking about Republican voters, because I do think that I'm not exactly convinced that these are still that this is the same Republicans that voted for Bush in the early 2000s. Like, I think Trump tapped into this very silent, millions of Americans who are incredibly conspiratorial, who feel like no party has their side, and they heard Trump and they thought, this guy's got my back. So now Republicans have to fight essentially their go-to base, who've had their backs for a long time, against these kind of radical activists who are now cinched to the Republican parties, and they have to grapple with this essentially divided base. Or at least that's my take on. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it definitely is the same group of people. I think a substantial portion of the Republican Party has legitimately just become more right wing. I think that you can see that in a lot of the exit polls for Republican primaries, where like they'll compare the exit polls. Like, you won't see substantially higher turnout. You won't see like, oh, there's like 50% more people voting in Republican primaries, which might infer that there's like a different proportion of the base. What you'll see is relatively similar primary turnout, but you'll see, the Republican Party's become less religious, but more extreme conservative. Like more Republican primary voters are identifying as very conservative or ultra conservative. And for them, that translates into, I really, really love and support Donald Trump. I mean, me personally, I remember I remember talking to a friend once, and he says, I'll never forgive Trump for brainwashing my grandma.
Yeah.
And that's what he said to me. And I've had that experience with family members. I've talked to many people who've had that experience where it was like, man, like, my mom growing up wasn't anti-vax. Like, she didn't believe in all this QAnon crazy shit. But like, man, when Trump got elected, it just triggered something. And like, they're just different people now. Right. And it's not to say that Republican primary voters are alien or that they don't have some like material reason for feeling that way. I think that they do. My opinion is just that they're voting for the wrong person to achieve their ultimate goals, right? Like, Trump is not the person who's going to lead to a more equal, egalitarian society. Trump's not the person who's going to lead to a better regulatory state that gets you higher wages, right? Trump's not the person who's going to bring back domestic manufacturing, right? Like, just none of his policies really lead to those like material circumstances that you're, concerned about, that lead you to go down this path, unfortunately speaking. But I'll never forget that. I'll never forget him saying, I'll never forgive Trump for brainwashing my grandma. Because
I think a lot of us can like feel that pinch too, where their family members. I've talked about it in my videos and stuff too, that I've got family members who I love deeply. Obviously, I despise their political views. There's no question about it. But who I feel are part of a cult, and so for me, that drives so much of my animus towards Trump and towards Republican leaders, right? So, I grew up in rural Kentucky. I don't hate the Republican voter, because very often, even before Trump, I view the Republican voter as also being partial victims. I think one of the great deceptions that the Republican Party, even prior to Trump, pulled off is making poor rural voters in red states effectively cannon fodder for an economic policy, a fiscal policy, which harmed them or at least didn't help them. It's like the great con of all time. And then Trump took that mentality and then dispersed it with, conspiracy theories with respect to Q and stolen elections and things like that. And people have just been eating it up. And it's heartbreaking. It's frustrating. I'm not saying there's no anger there, but that drives so much of my contempt for conservative thought leaders and elected Republicans, because these are people who should know better, who traffic in politics professionally, and should be in a position to provide some sort of moral pushback. I mean, the iconic example is during the Nixon administration, when you had Republicans go to President Nixon and say, if you don't resign, you will not only be impeached, you will be convicted in the Senate, because Republicans will also vote to convict you. Get the fuck out. There is no presence of that in the Republican Party today with respect to Trump. McConnell's a great example. Going back to Pisco's point, I'm sure McConnell considers Trump to be an enemy in certain respects, or at least a frenemy. He obviously, the reporting was contemporaneous that McConnell despised Trump. McConnell thought he was an idiot. And obviously we know how Trump feels about McConnell, because Trump airs his issues with McConnell publicly. McConnell always did it behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, McConnell puts party above country. And right, as long as Donald Trump is the leader of the Republican Party, he will always put Trump ahead of the rest of the country. McConnell was one of the ones who killed that bipartisan Senate border bill, even though he was encouraging it previously. He was quoted as saying, the politics have changed. So my question is, because I have two other topics I want us to address real quick, the economy itself. So Econoboi, here's my question. Explain this dissonance to me. Right now, Republicans for decades have enjoyed a perception advantage on the economy. In my opinion, not just because of propaganda, but also because this association between fiscal responsibility and conservatism. Like for me, I remember growing up hearing the phrase, I'm socially liberal, but fiscally conservative. And that was considered like the most, profound statement. There's just like this default association between economic prosperity and sensible economics and conservatism. So I think these things help like bake in the GOP advantage. Why is it, in your opinion, that these macroeconomic indicators, which we've always used to evaluate economies, right? We haven't changed the metrics by which we evaluate the strength of the national economy. Why they're all saying the Biden economy is fan-fucking-tastic. Why has it been so slow for Americans to recognize that? And then number two, why is there still no polling evidence that they're associating that with Biden? But if that it was happening under Trump, they'd be giving Trump all the credit in the world for it. What do you think?
I think 538 they have a podcast with hosted by Galen Daruk. And I think it's a pretty good podcast for kind of like regularly checking the temperature of the political landscape. And they had a podcast on this specific topic where they had a couple of economists who are sort of in charge of measuring consumer sentiment was one of them. And then the other one studied sort of partisanship and how it affects sort of your views on the economy. And what they said was that consumer sentiment's ticking up. And what you tend to see is that, especially in periods of higher elevated inflation, that consumer sentiment is just sticky with prices. So, and if you look at a graph of consumer sentiment and overlay inflation, what you see is that there's about a 6-month delay. So as disinflation started to happen, consumer sentiment was still going down because people were still pissed off, even though there was disinflation happening. But at a certain point, expectations settle, and they start to notice prices being a bit more stable than they used to, and then consumer sentiment ticks up. And what you see, based on just going to Fred and going to the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, what you see is that consumer sentiment is actually about as high as it was as when Biden took office. And it's about as high as it was actually when Obama won re-election. So it's not really clear to me that even people are necessarily going to go into this election, assuming we stay the course. That's a big assumption, but assuming we stay the course, that people are going to go into this election with like an incredible hatred of the economy and like attaching that to Joe Biden. I think that the economy becomes more of an asset to Joe Biden as we go further and further and further into disinflation, into maybe the Fed cutting rates, into just generally consumer sentiment getting better. And then, in terms of Republicans specifically, like one thing that one of the economists said on this podcast was that it seems to be the case that when you look at sentiment by partisanship, like bipartisanship, not bipartisanship. When you look at it by, how partisan the person is, that consistently Republicans tend to cheer louder and boo harder, right? That typically speaking, when a Republican's in office, Republican voters and Republican politicians and like Republican sort of, general members of the party will be like super duper crazy, like, oh my God, the economy is great. All of a sudden, because a Republican's in office, it's amazing. And then when a Democrat's in office, they'll do the exact opposite. The economy's dog shit. It's horrible. Everything's going terrible. Whereas Democrats will be a little bit more muted. The effect still exists with Democrats, where Democrats perceive the economy to be better when a Democrat's in office, worse when a Republican's in office. But the skew is not quite as extreme with Democrats, which again, I think just goes back to this general sort of trend of like Republicans are genuinely speaking, significantly more partisan than the average, Democratic voter. And I mean, there's a lot of sort of heuristics for that. Like, obviously, look at who we elect, right? We go from, Clinton to Obama to not to Trump, from Clinton to Obama to Biden. Whereas, the Republicans go from Dole, who's, I mean, about as centrist a, conservative as you can imagine, to Bush, who, a little bit more conservative leaning, let's say, and then to Trump, who, substantially more conservative, which I think
you
is
skipped
fair to say
two
as well.
very more moderate conservatives, Econoboi. I'd take issue with your analysis there. Maybe Trump is the one that's different in all the.
Well,
the
I mean,
chain here.
yeah, like McCain. I mean, McCain was the nominee, certainly as well, in there. But I don't know. I think that generally might go against the broad trend, especially when you look at the legislative elections, where the composition of the sort of House of Representatives of Republicans, right? We have this sort of, this like small kind of like small government libertarian Ron Paul type movement in the early 2000s, but that's never really gotten very big. But then the neocons took over from the moderates in the 90s, and then the Tea Partiers took over in 2010, and then the MAGA conservatives took over in basically 2016 onwards. And so I think that all that combined just kind of goes towards this general narrative that part of the reason why a lot of the sentiment of the economy is like sticky, it is partisan in nature, that like Republicans are ultimately going to perceive the economy to be substantially worse when a Democrat's in office, or like structurally worse when a Democrat's in office, even if the economy is actually decent.
Well, since you
Pisco, hang on, I know Pisco is going to respond, but I also there are two questions or two comments from the audience that I want you to address Econoboi when Pisco's done.
Sure thing. And so Econoboi, since you charted the start of this, or I don't know the start, but at least some of the nexus of the sentiment located in partisanship, and you mentioned the Tea Party, or I think you were referencing the Tea Party going into the MAGA movement. I'm curious. I'm going to come to you as a dissatisfied partisan Tea Party-ish MAGA type person and ask you why these solutions wouldn't be good to implement. So, for example, if I were to say we need to get rid of the Fed, or we want actually deflation, how would you respond to people who say that these are the kind of policy initiatives we need to take to get prices back to normal?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if somebody's prior is basically just that prices go down is good, it's very difficult to argue them out of that intuitively, because it is a very intuitive position. I think that it's kind of like when somebody asks, why would we want Medicare for all when that costs the government more money? It's like, well, but it costs the economy less money, right? And so we have to think of like in costs to consumers. And similarly, when we're thinking about inflation, well, prices being stable is a good thing. Inflation, like moderately high inflation, like above zero, let's say, is good as a signal to the economy, because it means that there's like generally a demand for money, right? Like that there's a demand for investment, money circulating. People are fighting for dollars, and that's a good thing. And that's why whenever you see, recessions, we typically have deflation, because money's not circulating, right? And so that's why it's good to have low, moderate inflation versus deflation. And at the end of the day, if your wages are rising above prices, well, guess what? Your life is better off, right? And so that's where you can funnel that back into the conversation that, hey, it's really about wages, it's really about our economic institutions, it's really about the distribution of income, and it's not necessarily about grapes go up by 1% a year in price or something like that.
That's right? A lot of words, a hard sell. I don't know how to make that sell. That's the one thing I've been having trouble with is to people who are like, well, why won't eggs be this much now? And I don't know what is the good one sentence answer to that.
Well, I think that the good one
hang on,
sentence answer.
sorry, just maybe you can tie this in. So, Econoboi, one of the questions was from Conscious Robot, I'm economically illiterate, but greedflation is kind of a problem, right? Aren't corporations raking in record profits?
Yeah, I was going to say that the good one sentence answer that you can give to people is that the biggest problem in the economy is not, 3% inflation versus 2% inflation like we normally have, right? Because people, again, when inflation is low and stable, nobody talks about inflation. Inflation was not a thing anybody gave a fuck about for like the last 20 years because, inflation generally was low and stable, right? And so I think that really, if I'm talking to that person, they're saying, the biggest problem is the fact that eggs go up by 10%. It's like, no, that's not the biggest problem. Like the biggest problem in this economy currently is the fact that we're so unequal as a society, right? That, the reason that the problem that you should look for is not, oh, the Fed raising interest rates, oh, these immigrants are coming in. You should look at the fact that we have a tax system that taxes you at a higher percentage than billionaires. That's the biggest problem in our economy, right? Both for your own circumstance and for economy-wide circumstance. And I think that when it comes to the Democratic message, I think that that's one of the few Democratic messages that's actually polled relatively well and actually been able to capture some of the ethos is this idea that, well, the reason we're seeing so much inflation is because of elevated corporate profits, right? That people actually have made that part of their general lexicon, like, oh, it's greedflation, right? It's not necessarily the fault of Biden or these policies. It's because these filthy corporations are basically extracting money out of the economy, out of people's pockets, right? So,
okay, so there's one other question specifically for Econoboi. This one right here, Fire Rises. Biden is just riding the post-COVID economic wave. All his stats are skewed because of it. What do you say?
I mean,
Some
I'm
are.
not sure. I mean, well, not really. Like, I think, I'm not really
Come
sure.
on,
how
the
long
jobs
ago-
created number, that is misleading.
Well, no, because he's saying he's currently riding the wave, right? And I think that the
Okay.
issue I have with that is that, I mean, look, COVID began in March of 2020, right? In terms of this country, that was
Yes.
4 years ago, right? The lockdowns ended, I believe. Lockdowns functionally ended essentially about 6 months into Biden's term. Biden's been president over 3 years now, right? So I mean, unless the argument is, well, hey, the fact that lockdowns ended 2.5 years ago, but we're still riding a wave of like opening up the economy. I mean, I really am
That's
not
what
convinced by
Democrats say
that
about
argument.
Trump's economic progress. They say they're riding off of Obama's economic wave from the recovery into from the Great Recession.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between saying that, like, it's a matter of drawing the bright line, basically, right? Like, I think that for a lot of Republicans, they'll say, well, the economy was good under Trump. And the question that I always have for them is like, okay, what are the policies that Trump did that made the economy better? And what a lot of them will say is, well, he cut taxes. And it's like, okay, well, 90% of those benefits went to the top 1% and they saved that money. That money actually didn't circulate in the economy. It didn't lead to higher levels of investment. Like, so besides that, what did he do? Oh, well, he cut regulations. Okay, well, what regulations did he cut? Just tell me, like, what are the regulations that he made substantially more efficient, that made the economy save a lot of money, made it more efficient? The answer is always, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he cut regulations somewhat, and I mean, that's probably good, right? And so the issue is that I think that it's almost like arguing with a Christian who's never read the Bible, right? It's like you just kind of culturally are attached to this notion of Christianity and what you think the Bible says. And similarly, when you talk to one of these conservatives who's really attached to the Trump economy, you can't really draw a bright line. But with Biden, I can draw very clear bright lines as to what did Biden do that improved the economy substantially or made a better economic circumstance for the average person. That's a little bit easier for me than a Trump supporter because Trump, frankly, didn't really pass that many bills
Correct.
that substantially affect the economy, right?
So I'm not anywhere near as economically literate as Econoboi is. I consider myself more conversant than the average person. The case I've been trying to make in my videos is this. Number one, and I'm sure Econoboi would cop to this, it is reductive as hell, Democrat or Republican, to associate the strength of an economy, certainly on a national scale, singularly with the president of the United States. The thing I always say when I discuss President Biden's economy is I say, individually, the president of the United States is the most powerful and influential person in the world. And certainly things that the president can do, not just in terms of executive action and legislation, but also the shit that he says, certainly can have an impact on markets and the economy. So I don't want to say that the president has nothing to do with it. But my beef is the reason that I am that guy who says when they talk about the strength of the Trump economy pre-COVID, which by the way, why would we ever grant that? Donald Trump was president for 4 fucking years. I will die on the hill of I'm not giving you a mulligan for 2020 unless you want to sign in blood that you would do the same for a Democrat, which they'll never do. And I refuse. I will never play by the double standard. He gets fucking credit and the blame for all 4 years, not just 3. Number one. Number two, if you look at a lot of those macroeconomic metrics, they were continuations of Obama era trends, except I think it spiked up in terms of like average stock market performance under Donald Trump, right? But again, to what extent that is in terms of where you would rank order that in terms of macroeconomic metrics, I feel like GDP growth and unemployment are more important. I digress. Then, as Econoboi says, okay, well, can you actually attribute shit that Trump did to the strength of the economy? Or is it just like post hoc ergo propter hoc? This thing happened after Trump was in office or during Trump's presidency, ergo he gets credit for it. Then with Biden, you can actually point to the American Rescue Plan, avoiding a double-digit recession, creating 4 million jobs ahead of schedule because it invigorated the economy. You can also point to if you want to, this is my beef with people who say, well, the 15 million jobs, that's post-pandemic recovery. Well, let's say I grant the premise. Probably not inclined to, because I can point out to Biden's vaccination rollout plan, which allowed the economy to open back up, right? So Biden gets credit for that. But let's say I grant you that. Biden, I think we hit pre-pandemic recovery in terms of like the job numbers in like 2023. And if you compare Biden's economy during Trump's economy for a similar period of time and you account for COVID, there have been more jobs created under Biden than Trump. So no matter how you fucking slice it, Biden is just better than Trump. And we can actually point to material things. The Chips and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and all the things. I
think there's something to be said, and Josiah, you and I have talked about this before on various shows, is that Republicans, again, that cheering louder is not just a thing that Republicans vote or do. It's a thing that Republican politicians do as well, right? Where it seems like a lot of Democrats are frankly very tepid, right, when it comes to defending the record of Democratic presidencies, right? In part, that's because we do have like the Democratic Socialists, Democrats who, to be fair, like I have my own criticisms for the Obama economy. If for instance, the economy was going to recover at some point after the financial recession, even if nothing was done by any government official. But it's a matter of how quick was that recovery. Like if Obama had passed twice the stimulus, well, we probably would have recovered about twice as fast, right? But he passed a very small stimulus package. So we had a very slow, methodical recovery, which continued basically until COVID, right? And so, I think that there's some legitimate criticism of the Democratic record, but I wish Biden, and hopefully he'll do this going forward, was just a little bit more forceful about that. The Republicans taking credit for infrastructure investment that they voted against, right? The Republicans who were saying, we need to manufacture chips in this country and chips are such a problem and chips, but they vote against the CHIPS Act, right? And it's like
another great moment of the State of the Union, by the way, was when he pointed that out, that they were taking credit for, what's that? Are you sponsored by...
No, somebody asked. He's like, "Is my man drinking WD-40?"
It kind of looks like that can. Yeah, just to be real.
But no, I think that to be fair, and that's one of the reasons why I think that Obama. No, I'm sorry, not Obama. I think that's one of the reasons why I think that Biden, generally speaking, or I keep saying generally, genuinely speaking, has been a better president than Obama. Is that especially going into re-election, he has a much more substantial record to actually run on than Obama had. And you can actually point to specific, huge economic accomplishments. Like for instance, we're hitting record renewable energy investments. I think that there was some crazy statistic, which was like, I think that the Biden administration had added something like hundreds of thousands of jobs just in like the renewable energy sector alone. And of course, that can't all be because of the IRA, but it's a substantial portion of it is. And, I know that from a personal basis. And so just that alone is...
You got the money, you got the check, and now you're...
No, what I'm saying is, like, that's something that resonates with a lot of people. There's even a lot of conservatives who think that climate change is a problem. And so, like, hey, the largest investment in, energy and sustainability in the country's history, that's a great record to run on, right? Investing in manufacturing through the CHIPS Act, the biggest bipartisan infrastructure deal in the country's history, the what do you call it, the American Rescue Plan, right? These are all things that are very substantial that he can run on. Whereas Trump, unfortunately, he's in the same position as the average Republican who thinks that the economy was good under Trump. Oh, well, look at this. Unemployment was low, black unemployment, lowest in history under me. But if you actually have a conversation with Trump and you actually have that debate with Trump, like, well, what did you actually do that led to the average person being better off under your administration? Well, we cut taxes. Well, hey, most of that went to the top 1%. Well, yes, but I mean, well, but you're grooming Biden. He's demented. Like, there's
We'll
not
set
really
that
a
debate up,
substantive...
Econoboi, between you and Trump.
No, but I'm saying, like, there's not really a substantive response that you can give. And although the average voter is not like an economist, obviously, I think that the big things that are motivating even the MAGA base are the things that I talked about, right? When inequality is really, really high, people tend to vote for more radical politics, right? And I don't think that's an exception with the MAGA base. Right-wing and left-wing populism both take advantage of high levels of inequality when it rises. But I think Biden's done a much better job of actually addressing that than Trump. So
in conclusion, it's a vibe session, and you're one of the vibe session people.
No, I wouldn't say it's a vibe session.
You're
like,
calling
I think
the voters
that
delusional.
You and Will Stansel, come on, baby, admit it. Admit it.
no, I wouldn't say it's a vibe session because, like,
Yeah.
I think people have legitimate reason to be angry when, like, inflation is higher than it normally is, right? Like, when we have substantially higher price increases than we're used to, it's just understandable that people are going to notice that. People are going to be like, hey, I don't like this. And it's also understandable, especially for lower income people, like, like me personally, like, I would consider myself, I would say, like, upper middle income, like, just based on the job that I do. Like, I don't like when the price of eggs goes from $2 a dozen to $2.50. I just simply don't notice that as much as somebody who's really counting every dollar. Very true. Yeah.
Well, I do want to say there's an interesting point that Econoboi is making. I mean, I generally agree with a lot of what he's saying. But his solution in terms of the rhetoric is interesting to me because it sounds like what his solution is to kind of shift the dialogue a little bit and say, I don't really think that's the problem. I think the problem is this. And the shifting is occurring to be more populist. In other words, he is arguing that, I think, I'm hearing this, as a rhetorical strategy, even though you have this long analysis about why Biden's not responsible for it. At the end of the day, what you think is most rhetorically effective is to shift the dialogue and focus on inequality, which is a Bernie populist talking point. And I just find that interesting. I also get the sense that that's true. I agree with you, Connor. I get the sense that that's true, but it also gives you a sense of where the country is at the moment, that they're in a populist mode.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that Biden himself has spoken more populistically, let's say, and in a more populist manner in general, and like engaged in more sort of populist policy through industrial policy. Like, it seems like we have both parties that believe in sort of like some level of protectionism, some level of like industrial policy. But I think that's the message that I would try to sell to voters is, how do you want this anger to be channeled? Do you want it to be channeled through tax cuts to the rich? Well, if you want that, then vote for the Republicans. But if you want it to be channeled through smart, empirically validated, effective industrial policy, which so many other countries have engaged in, you vote for the Democrats. And again, we have records to compare. Trump did his industrial policy where, he did tariffs and made everything more expensive for people. And he did, imagine Trump, who is president now, doing a bunch of tariffs. I mean, that would only make inflation worse, but did a bunch of tariffs, made all of our allies pissed off. I mean, domestic manufacturing wasn't exactly great under his administration, and tax cuts for the rich, whereas Biden is doing substantially less of the bad things and substantially more of the good things, right? And so that's why I think Biden's going to have the edge over Trump. I mean, one of the things in the IRA that he did, for instance, which I think he can speak directly to forgotten sort of coal communities, is that he added specific subsidies, and whatever, policy wonks and neoliberals can get mad about this, but like, again, it's we don't live in a time where neoliberal economics is popular, right? So cope, I guess, a little bit more. But the point is that Biden added specific subsidies to the IRA that said, hey, if you build a renewable energy plant in an energy community, which was like natural gas or coal, you will get extra incentive to invest in those projects. Like, one thing I hear about the Trump economy all the time is, like, and it's so funny when fucking conservatives say this and they just don't know shit about what Trump actually did. They'll talk about what was it called? Opportunity zones. Oh, Trump did opportunity zones. That's a great thing. Isn't that great for black communities and poor communities? Because basically, if you invest in these communities, you get a tax cut. And it's like, well, yeah, that's fine. But Biden actually did that times like 1,000 with hundreds of billions of dollars of investment disproportionately directly in coal and natural gas communities. right? And that's what you're starting to see in places like West Virginia, where like the average high school kid in West Virginia isn't learning to be a fucking coal miner or who gives a shit about that. You've got a lot of trade schools that are funneling them into learning how to install solar panels and learning how to work as wind turbine technicians, right? And those are the jobs of the future. And that's what Biden invested in. And I just think that that's a substantially more effective record to run on than Trump. Biden just has to make it known. And I think that Democrats historically have done a poor job making it known that, hey, if you want jobs to be created, if you want equality, if you want the rich to pay their fair share, you vote for Democrats. You don't vote for Republicans.
Yeah, so before we change the subject to the last thing, and this is where Pisco might get heated when we turn it to the last topic, and I might get heated too, depending on what Pisco's position is. I'm curious what the rest of you think, but I will say there is polling data to strongly suggest that it's complicated. So I hear a lot of people, not just like people are on the quote unquote far left, but like I listen to a lot of Pod Save America. They're former Obama and Clinton staffers. They were speechwriters. They were pollsters and policy wonks. They surprised me too, because their position has been for the longest time that the president and Democrats should not spend too much time trying to tout the president's record because it comes off lecturing. And I understand that in theory, but I just kind of reject it ultimately in the end, because I feel like this idea that, commentators and the media should simply reflect what people believe and don't shape what people believe. I just don't think it's true. I think it's a feedback loop. I think part of the reason why Republicans enjoy such a colossal advantage in terms of perception on the economy is because for years and years and years and years and years, they've been relentlessly told to associate a strong economy with the Republican presidency. So I do feel like there has to be some degree of re-education and propaganda associated with the president's wins, that you shouldn't just completely distance yourself from it. Obviously, you got to be careful about how you do it. But there's also polling data which suggests this works, especially among the so-called double haters. So people who are not fans of President Biden or Donald Trump. If you look, the vast majority of them are completely unaware about the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure law. And then if you make them aware of it, they flip to being just a Trump hater. Like there's poll after poll after poll shows that you can win double haters who are dissatisfied with both Trump and Biden by educating them about Biden's policy accomplishments. And it also goes to the border. Chris Murphy, who's a Democratic senator, he actually released, he was talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was fascinating. There's credible polling which indicates that even though Republicans enjoy a 15-point advantage on the border, if people are told that the immigration bill was scuttled because of cynical Republican politics, it doesn't go 15 points in the opposite direction. It doesn't give Democrats a 15-point advantage, but it eliminates it. They're then neck and neck, right? So it makes it a much more competitive landscape. So I agree. I feel like we've got to just start bragging. There was a video that went viral of a rapper who was complaining to the president and the vice president. He's like, y'all got to learn how to fucking brag, because Trump did it all the time about shit that he had no business bragging about and would very often lie about. And you just got to try doing that. And so I do think that has to be part of the calculus. So here's where the topic changes. I want to talk about the Supreme Court for a minute. Okay. And this is, Pisco's a fucking lawyer here. All right. And he and I have some agreements with this. We have some disagreements. Pisco, my man, I'm getting fed up with this fucking court, bro. I'm getting fed up with it. And also on a structural level, just the more I keep thinking about this, and you compare it with every other advanced democracy on earth, and I definitely want to hear what Stax and Econoboi have to say about this too. We have a fucked up Supreme Court. Like from just a structural basis, no term limits, the fucking rigid composition, a simple majority vote for judicial, like the Supreme Court's judicial review powers in this country is OP compared to any other country on earth. You could easily make the case, that as long as the Congress and as long as the Supreme Court pay the appropriate deference to the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court is by far the most powerful branch of government. So we got to rein this court in, baby. I'm not saying it's illegitimate. I'm just saying 9 unelected lifetime appointees being more powerful than the president and the Congress, that doesn't work with me, especially when it's completely out of touch with what the majority of people want. So the context for this is the recent 14th Amendment decision, which was a 9-0 top line decision that Colorado and states can't take the president or presidential candidates off ballots. And then you have the upcoming immunity case, which has not been decided yet, But look what they did with respect to the scheduling. They didn't have to take the case in the first place. They put it at the very oral arguments, the very last day in fucking April. Defend this goddamn court.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to start by explaining why this ruling is terrible substantively. And without reference to the outcome, I think this ruling would be terrible if they were trying to get Joe Biden off the ballot, to be frank with you. And so I'm going to start by attacking the ruling and saying it's ridiculous. Both the concurrence, both concurrences, and the per curiam decision, I think they're both ridiculous. And I understand, by the way, that it was a 9-0 decision on an important matter that disagrees with me. That's okay. I predicted the court was going to come this way, but I disagree vehemently, and I'm going to explain why I think substantively they got it wrong. And in the next part of my answer, I'm going to defend why I think, even though I think there should be some reforms, I don't go as far as pondering politics Josiah goes in his attacks on our independent judiciary. So quote unquote, I'm sure he'll say independent. So first of all, why did the court get this wrong, in my opinion? Well, it doesn't have to do with, in my opinion, with like the outcome per se of Trump being on the ballot or not being on the ballot. It's how you get there. It's the reasoning that the court gives for that. And I think even as a structural matter, I'm not so sure that Josiah or me think it's like, in terms of the political discourse, the best outcome that Trump be disqualified from any ballot. I think ultimately we can't rely on the courts to solve a political problem, which is Trumpism, the rise of Trump MAGA authoritarianism in this country. The court's not going to save us from that. So, like, in terms of the outcome, I'm agnostic about which outcome I want vis-a-vis like the actual result. But in terms of the reasoning and why Section 3, they said, could not be enforced by the Colorado courts, it was horrendous reasoning. Why? This is what they said about the provision of Section 3, which says that you cannot be in office if you were engaged in insurrection before and having been a previous oath taker. They said because the 14th Amendment was designed to be aggrandizing the power of the federal government generally and lowering the power of the state governments generally, it would be perverse to read it as giving authorities to states to go above and beyond what they were allowed to do pre-Section 3. Now, on first blush, that seems to make sense, right? It is true that the 14th Amendment was a reshuffling of power in many ways of the federal versus state government. The 14th Amendment, as many of you may know, gave required states to provide due process of law, provided equal protection of the law, and gave birthright citizenship. And so there are a lot of provisions there that are restricting the states. And so at first blush, you might say, hey, that makes sense. Why should states be allowed to put impositions on federal candidates for office? But you have to remember that, and again, they said without authorization from Congress, you have to remember that the court, in coming to that conclusion, said that states are allowed under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to go after state officials. And the rationale they gave for that is, well, states already had this assumed sovereignty to fix their elections and their governmental structures however they wanted to. And so we're not going to read Section 3 as some kind of abridging of the pre-existing rights that states had to shape their elections, right? And to shape their qualifications for state officers. And so their argument was, well, states are allowed to enforce Section 3 without congressional authorization. That is, it is self-executing as to state officers because states had this pre-existing authority to shape their governments. However, they didn't have this pre-existing authority with federal officers because their federal officers are a creature of the Constitution. And so we can't assume that as part of the sovereign background. What's the problem with this? The states are specifically delegated the authority to elect electors for president under the Constitution in Article 2. That is to say, just like states have pre-existing authorities to structure their government however they want, they are specifically delegated the authority to assign their electors however they want. And you might think that's weird. I don't agree with the system. I'm against the Electoral College. I think it should be a unitary popular vote for president. But the truth is, in this country, there isn't a unified election for president. It is 50 states plus DC, independent elections that don't even have to happen. You don't even need to have a popular election for electors for president in a state. In fact, there are many states in which...
To clarify, when you say need, you mean the Constitution does not require them.
Right.
Yeah.
So the states before assign their electors directly through legislation without any vote. And there are myriad limitations that states impose to be on the ballot. Think about it. Like, you need to have 40,000 signatures to be on the ballot. That seems like the state is imposing a state rule, a state limitation on qualification for ballot access for a federal candidate. Exactly what they said was illegitimate under the 14th Amendment. Well, that makes no sense. Then how can states put additional limitations and restrictions on federal candidates for officers in this kind of loosey-goosey, ad hoc way? Additionally, no one seems to deny that states are allowed to enforce other federal qualifications for office. That is, the age of a candidate, the national citizenship. Think about Cenk Uygur running for office. They don't even try to distinguish states' ability to enforce that as to federal candidates in one sense. But and Neil Gorsuch himself was in a case called Hassan in the I think the 11th Circuit or the 10th Circuit, I forget. Whatever circuit Colorado's in, he ruled that states are allowed to enforce the the natural citizenship qualification as against federal candidates for state office, for state elections for those candidates.
And didn't the Colorado Supreme Court, when they made their 14th Amendment decision, preemptively cite
yes.
Judge Gorsuch? Yeah.
And so there is not even an attempt by the majority in this per curiam decision to, one, deal seriously with the presidential electors clause, which assigns states the authority to assign their electors. It's a pre-existing authority that is an assumed part of a structure, just like the state's right to organize their governments. And they don't even deal with, well, then how can states enforce other federal qualifications for federal offices in state elections? And so it's an absolutely shambolic opinion. And guess what? 9 justices voted against what I just articulated. But there is no response. There is absolutely no response to it. It's a complete misreading of a basic constitutional civics procedure. It is a ruling, an outcome in search of an argument. And you can see now, like, even I understand it's a 9-0 decision. So you're like, what is it? You think he knows better than this? Look at the legal commentary about the responses to this. How many people are in favor of it? How many people will actually defend the opinion on the merits? I look forward to all the lawyers coming on streams to defend it with and argue it against me. So, and then the other part of it, the advisory opinion, where the court, the per curiam court, went beyond what they needed to. A basic sort of everyone thought tenet of federal jurisprudence is you're not supposed to decide cases that are not before you. And they decided much more than they needed to in order to avoid Chief Justice Roberts and others potential problems later on when people try to enforce federal qualifications in federal courts, because they don't want to have to hear that. It's a little bit, dissatisfying for them, or a little bit scary or spooky to envision other potential challenges that aren't based on congressional legislation. And what do you have then? The result is they've read out Section 3 of the Constitution effectively, because they know Congress isn't going to enforce it. And there's no...
it's dead letter, isn't it?
It's a dead letter unless people decide to get charged for the first time in history with the insurrection statute. That's the one statute that they said could enforce it. Although, keep in mind, that statute was passed before Section 3 of the 14th Amendment in 1862. And recall that 14th Amendment was passed later in the 1860s. And so it's weird to think that that statute is enforcing Section 3. And so this opinion is sloppy. It's messy. It doesn't address the argument to the other side. It is a horrible opinion. The concurrence does a good job about the advisory opinion, but they are also horrible in the fundamental misplacement of civics here. Horrific decision, in my opinion. And I'm happy to debate that. It's still my opinion. It was my opinion weeks ago. I would have rather they come to the opinion that Trump did not engage in insurrection than to come to this opinion.
Yeah. So before you defend SCOTUS, a couple of things you pointed out. So Congressman Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, I believe, it's not going to go anywhere, but it's a good political stunt if Democrats play it right. He's like, listen, I take the Supreme Court's decision at face value. Fine, fair enough. It's up to Congress. And so he is actually trying to resurrect legislation, which it's basically executing legislation for the 14th Amendment. Now, where this isn't going to go anywhere, Republicans have absolutely no interest in taking that up.
Imagine
right?
that.
But if Raskin, who is very shrewd, very smart, I love that guy, and if Democrats are firing on all cylinders, they can use this as a potential wedge issue, since polling with respect to January 6th and Trump's big lie in general is still really bad for him in terms of the general public. So this could be a good wedge issue where Raskin can say, it's kind of curious that these Republicans aren't interested in codifying
Section 3.
Right. And obviously a much more rhetorically effective way than what we're going to do here. So with that in mind, now...
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, you were saying with all that said,
it's a shambolic opinion. It's horrible. It's in line with a lot of other. They're dodging it in the worst possible way and creating a bad precedent in the process of doing it. Why do I think the Supreme Court is still worth fighting for? Not to say that I'm against any and all changes to it. I agree that the Supreme Court number of justices should be increased. There's just too much workload these days. I agree that it's been static for too long. I think that what McConnell did with Garland's nomination was horrific, and it deserves it's as though there were a nuclear option pulled by Republicans to increase the number of seats in their term. So I don't see a difference between doing that and what Senator McConnell did at the time. So I agree there should be some changes there. But an independent judiciary, in quotes, whatever you want to say, insulated from the political branches is a very good idea. Is a very good idea that, in my opinion, in general, promotes stability in democracies. And I understand that right now, recent decisions we don't agree with, Dobbs, this opinion, the Biden student loan case, which I think was also ridiculous decision by the Supreme Court. Just crazy opinion by the court.
Yeah.
But in general, over the long term, I respect the Supreme Court as an institution. And I'm not willing, because of my vehement disagreement on 1, 2, 3, or 7 cases in the last year, to say, hey, this court, we need to take away all their jurisdiction, or we need to shut it down, or we need to have an amendment, which will never pass anyway, to term limit them, that kind of thing. It's not worth our energy politically.
Okay, so again, I want Econoboi and Stax to jump in on this, but so whenever you guys feel ready. But here's my question. Let's be clear about a couple of things. Number one, constitutional amendments require 2 chambers or super majorities in both chambers and then 3/4 of the states to ratify. We're not getting an amendment anytime soon. It could be decades before we see one again. To put this in perspective, this is a sobering statistic, which also goes to show how, as amazing in theory as we have the oldest contiguous written documented constitution, the oldest contiguous democratic republic. I'm not here to shit on every institution here in the United States. We were a trendsetter for a reason, but I would argue that younger advanced democracies took our formula and improved on it in various ways. It is virtually impossible to make any constitutional head ground here in the United States. We've had 12,000 in 250 years, 12,000 literally attempts to amend the Constitution. We only have 27 amendments. It is the hardest, literally the hardest constitution in the world by far to amend. So to Pisco's point that it's impractical, you won't get any arguments out of me. Okay. But I guess my question is, practicality aside, in terms of the substance, this is the thing that I wrestle with. I'm not an attorney. I got a poli-sci degree, so constitutional structure is fascinating to me. We were sold this bill of goods with 3 co-equal branches, which is a bit of a misnomer. They're not co-equal in terms of raw power, because the founders always believed that Congress was supposed to be first among equals. In theory, Congress has the most checks it can impose on the other branches, and in theory, the fewest checks it receives, right? Here's the way I look at it, though, where again, I struggle with it, Pisco. I want you to help me out. I understand that you want, in theory, a high court which is insulated from politics. Let's assume that that's possible. I hear you. Why does it have to be this powerful and this rigid? There's no other advanced democracy on earth which has a court where, right now, what is the meaningful check against the United States Supreme Court? There's none. We can't get a constitutional amendment. What can the president do other than just non-acquiescence, which I assume you wouldn't support?
No, I wouldn't.
The Supreme Court was never intended to be the supreme branch. Never. They may have been supreme in their very narrow land, their very narrow lane, excuse me, but otherwise they're supposed to fuck off and let the vast majority of governing be done by the president and the Congress.
I want to let Econoboi and Stax in, but I just have a quick response to that. Is think about not all the cases, but a lot of the major cases that you're citing where the Supreme Court has got it extremely wrong, in my opinion. Let's start with Dobbs. Dobbs was a right invented by the court, even though I agree with Roe v. Wade. We wouldn't even have that right to discuss with if we didn't have a judicial review of a Texas law. And so this is a case where you're disagreeing with the court using overturning a previous use of judicial review. And so it seems incongruous to be mad at the court for even having judicial review or thinking they're being inappropriate about it when the case that you like that they're overturning is a prime example of judicial review. And then the second one, real quick, this recent case of Section 3, the court was saying you need legislation and you can't just self-execute, and we're giving it to Congress. And so to the extent that the court is imposing anything, it's just saying that you need to go through the political branches, which is what you're professing to say that they want anyway. It would seem, now I disagree with the court. I think the court is putting a limitation on the state abilities to act here, but they're not usurping the role of at least in those two examples, of the legislatures in that respect, at least not the legislators in Congress. They're giving Congress that authority. And the last case, I think, where it does go to your point is the Biden student loan example, where they are striking down a policy from the executive. But what they're saying is that Congress didn't legislate it. So you can spin that as them upholding the rights of the Congress to.
They do all sorts of clever sleights of hand. I'll respond to that. But again, Stax and Econoboi, if you guys want to jump in about.
Can I actually just clarify your position, Pisco?
Sure.
Because when asked about term limits, you mentioned that it wasn't politically feasible. But like, do you feel like it's like, is it political feasibility, or are you also like morally opposed to term limits? Like, if it was political feasible, would you go for it?
I'm against it substantively and politically. Yeah, I think that it's really good to have them to have these people be insulated, and giving them term limits would, I think.
I mean, there's ways to. I don't know. I disagree with this idea that you have to have a lifetime. I mean, we're Americans, right? We don't believe in lifetime offices except for Supreme Court justices, basically, right?
All federal judges. So this includes every federal.
Well, yeah,
judge.
federal
good
judges
behavior,
as well, right?
Let's just be clear. The basis for this is Article 3 or Section 3, or Article 3 of the Constitution.
Right. So long as you have good behavior or whatever. Yeah. I mean, I don't. There's obviously ways, and there's ways that other democracies have found to essentially cycle through justices in a way that politically insulates them, but is also appropriate for changing times, right? I mean, the Democrats will wheel out this quote from Thomas Jefferson, where he says something like, "It would be absurd for a document 17 years old to govern the people of a modern day," or something like that. And whereas Thomas Jefferson had this more radical view that the Constitution should be sort of regularly amended in an ordinary process generationally. Because that's just a fairly reasonable position to take, and so you could have term limits as well as sort of independent committees that provide the initial screening process for nominees to the court. This is what I think the UK does, where they have sort of an independent judiciary committee that provides sort of, hey, Prime Minister, here's 5 people that you can nominate, and then the Prime Minister picks amongst the 5 that have already been screened, and then it's typically a ceremonial appointment process because you've already got the independent judiciary process as well. I think Canada does something similar. I think they have term limits for their justices as well.
They have mandatory retirement ages, I believe Canada does.
Okay,
they have
sure,
some sort of function, yeah.
And so I just don't think that we need lifetime appointment. We don't have a lifetime appointed Federal Reserve chair, but the Federal Reserve is incredibly politically insulated. And I don't think that you need anything. I don't think term limits do anything differently to the court. I think that
they wouldn't be insulated. I just want to say they wouldn't be insulated if they were expounding on the meaning of like the Second Amendment. If the Federal Reserve, I understand that Federal Reserve wields enormous power and maybe even more day-to-day power on the American life of a regular person through their use of monetary policy. I understood, but if they were ruling in the way on issues to the import of the American people, the way the Supreme Court would, there would not be an insulation politically, and it would be very, very different, in my opinion.
Well, no, I mean,
also, I just want to point out.
I think you should have a one-term limit, right? So if you wanted to say like, hey, if you're going to be appointed to the Supreme Court, you have a one-term limit and it's 10 years or something, where, in theory, you don't have a lot of motivation to, politically justify your opinions going forward because you know that you're only going to have a one-term limit as well. That kind of goes into the second point that I was going to make, which is that I think that, people have like economics brain where, like a lot of wonky people on Twitter will say shit like, oh, we shouldn't have subsidized renewables. We should just tax carbon. And that's like per dollar, the exact same thing. And it's like, okay, well, if you want to just, throw all politics and sort of context out, that's one thing. But I think it's the same thing with justices. I think that Thurgood Marshall, when he was getting nominated to the court, he said something along the lines of, what did he say? He said something along the lines of like, the way that I make my rulings is I kind of just try to do what I think is right and then let the law catch up. And he got criticized for that. But the reality is I think that literally every single justice just has some sort of moral foundation that they use, and then they judge in accordance with that. And I know that people like Scalia will say things like, oh, no. Every good judge will make decisions that he or she personally disagrees with. I don't think that he's telling the truth. I think that every single one of these justices is hyperly politically motivated, not because they feel the pressure of getting thrown out by the voters or anything like that, but I think that these are conservatives and liberals on the Supreme Court, and they are ruling accordingly. The best example of that, the last thing that I'll say is when Amy Coney Barrett was up for appointment, Dick Durbin was questioning her on one of the decisions she made, which was that basically she said that felons would be allowed to own guns, and that it actually was unconstitutional when she was a circuit judge when she ruled that felons who are barred from owning guns, actually that's unconstitutional. To which Dick Durbin said, well, I thought you're a textualist. I thought you just read the text of the law and then you apply the law. Well, you're not a Supreme Court justice when you're making this decision. You're a federal justice. The law says people who are felons cannot own guns. And what she said was, well, I went back into the history and I discovered all this context and I basically found a way to rule against it. She is a person who is a conservative and she makes conservative rulings. I don't think we can pretend that these court justices are some apolitical body.
If you heard me to be like a formalist or some person who believes the law exists in some real space somewhere, I'm a realist before I'm any of that, right? So I agree that these are people, these are human beings with failings and biases and all that stuff. And I understand that these people have their biases, and I don't dispute that. And I don't dispute that they'll give certain benefits of the doubt to one party or one political view versus others. And, you've seen it happen. And I think the example there's a lot of examples of very polarized topics in which there's a clear division along sort of ideological lines. That's true.
Yeah.
But I do agree that the Supreme Court is the most reasoned branch, despite that, because they have to put out their opinions. And I do think that sometimes they or often they're more united than you think. Recall, we're talking about in the context of a 9-0 decision. So whatever the split was here, there are 9 justices who disagreed with me. The liberals came with the conservatives, met and said, hey, this was not okay, and we're undoing what Colorado did. And so, first of all, there's more agreement than I think you're giving them credit for. And sometimes the splits aren't what you expect them to be. And so, yes, I agree with you that these are ultimately people who are fallible, who are political. But that doesn't mean the institution as a whole is not worth preserving, and that because you can't perfectly insulate, that no insulation is needed or necessary.
No, I said what my reforms would be, which would be having sort of an independent committee and some sort of term limit, right? I don't think that the institution of the Supreme Court should go away, but I do think that I think that a lot of conservatives and like more like establishment politician types, and I'm not saying that's a Pisco, obviously. I'm just saying that generally this rhetoric that I hear is, well, the Supreme Court is infallible. This is just an apolitical branch of people.
Who says that now? I'm going to call you on that. Who says that, Econoboi?
Like, dude, are you kidding me? Like every time the Democrats talk about adding court seats, that people will say, "Oh my goodness, that's so partisan. You're packing the court," and it's like every politician packs the court with people who politically agree with them. This is not a new thing. This is not an unusual thing.
I don't disagree with that, but I don't agree that your assessment that people are viewing the court as apolitical is correct. I mean, I think if you look at the public perception of the legitimacy of
perception, yes, I'm talking about
but at least the establishment types. I don't hear any Democrat. I mean, Biden went on stage and is like, "I'm sorry, justices, but I'm going to do some shit to undo what you did." I mean, if that is not a
okay, that's a really good pivot point right there, because also bridges where we were at the beginning. Do you take issue with that? A lot of people.
No. Okay, I don't take issue with that, because if I'm hearing Biden to say something that is not in conflict with the court's ruling, just like the student loan, where they're like, he's defying the Constitution. No, if you are using a certain authority to do some policy and the court rules against that and says you can't do it this way, then you can try other ways, just like Trump did with his Muslim bans. He tried the first one, and then he tried a second one, tried a third one, and then the third one was the one the Supreme Court said that, hey, that's actually okay to do. And so it's not the case that because Biden is saying, I don't agree with you, I'm going to make some changes, I don't have a problem with that. That's as long as what he's proposing is a constitutional thing or something that is
what if he pulled an exercise. What if he pulled an FDR and threatened to try to court pack? What if he was
specifically or generally just saying
the Supreme Court? So right now there's a federal statute which locks the Supreme Court's composition at 9 justices. That it's been the case for 150 years. It can be overturned. So Biden, if Biden basically said, listen, I'm going to make it very reductive, just so we're all on the same page. If he basically took the posture, I'm the president of the United States. I am not your subordinate. We are supposed to be co-equals. So you fuck with me a little bit. Now I'm going to start fucking with you a little bit. And if my party takes majorities in both chambers, I'm going to repeal that federal statute and pack the court. I would argue, to the extent that there are checks and balances which flow from the president to the Supreme Court, FDR's threat of a court pack was an example of the president using a bully pulpit to say, chill. You can't be striking down all my shit 24/7. Back off.
That is, wait. I think that that's a valid check and balance. So one of the checks and balances in the Supreme Court's power are: one, Congress funds the Supreme Court. Two, they can make exceptions to their appellate jurisdiction, and so Congress, if it wanted to, could make make the exception, swallow the rule, and say you have no appellate jurisdiction to even hear these cases. And the president, of course, to the extent that he has a role in the legislative process, is allowed to wield that. Now, if he's making specific threats as the commander in chief to the Supreme Court directly and saying like, "Hey, if you don't rule this way in my case, I have the power," I think that's improper. If you're trying to wield it as a there are ways that it could be phrased, or extortionist methods that he could employ, where I would say that's improper. But using only the power that he's been delegated in the legislative process and his control over the political branches, hey, we are allowed to make the Supreme Court as big or as small as we want. That's a legitimate use of power. Just like McConnell was technically allowed not to have a hearing for Merrick Garland, the president and the Congress allowed to pass legislation to change the jurisdiction of the court, to add seats, and they're not allowed to say that they're term limited. But I'm in favor of expanding the court for reasons I've already outlined.
Sure. I understand that. But see, the thing, I guess, that I wasn't trying to catch you in a trap. I was curious where you were on this, because again, so I actually, and I linked this in chat, I went fishing for what I called my mega effort post from 8 months ago on Destiny's Reddit, where I said Dems should totally fuck with SCOTUS ASAP. That's the title of it. And I'm going back and rereading this, and I'm just baffled at
how right you were,
at not only how right I was, but also how OP our Supreme Court is. Because the thing I keep struggling with is, so you have other countries and other states, right? So you have laboratories of democracy here in the United States, as well as like foreign peer nations, whose Supreme Court, they take the approach that the court system plays a role, but it is not to supersede the primacy of the more proximate democratic bodies. In other words, you take the United Kingdom, which is a constitutional monarchy. They have a fucking monarch. They don't have a codified constitution the way we do. And their high court, as we know it today, basically sprung into existence within the past 20 years. Mm-hmm. The court plays a role in the UK, but the general approach is Parliament is better. Parliament is more powerful. Parliament's more important. The court plays a critical role, but it is not to supersede the role of Parliament.
I want to bring your attention to the cases which are bringing this forward. And these are all cases in which the Supreme Court says, if you want abortion rights, legislate it. If you want to enforce Section 3,
but this is the sleight of hand. Aren't they doing a sleight of hand there for political reasons? Didn't we just say that by effectively kicking the can back to Congress under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, they've effectively rendered Section 3
politically they have,
because they know that will never happen?
Politically they have, and maybe that was the rationale. I think that part of it, they didn't want to make the decision. So I'm a realist in that sense, but institutionally, they did give it to the political branch, and they said, we're not here to say how you enforce it. It's up to the political branches. Now, I think that's improper for reasons already stated, because in my opinion, the people already enforced Section 3 and already implemented
the problem with that, though, is that we have to, I just think that there's a reasonable analysis to be done, like Josiah, on like the genuineness of that ruling, because I would be like, you have Supreme Court justices gesturing at getting rid of gay marriage, saying that, well, hey, I mean, this was an improperly decided thing, and we should leave it back to this.
Wait! I just want to pause there again. I'm so sorry for cutting you off.
No, I understand. Another example. I understand, like, about throwing it back to the legislature, right?
No. That's not the point. The point is that right of gay marriage is a judicially created substantive due process right that was never voted on by the people.
Well, now the right of gay marriage is codified into law because
now it is correct.
Yes, because Democrats snuck that one in, or rightly put that one in.
Yeah,
I would find it I would find it difficult to believe. I mean, you referenced the student loan forgiveness case, where
Yes.
it just seems so incredibly clear that if you read the statutes that were passed by
Agreed.
Congress,
Wave.
and you understand, practically speaking, the enforcement mechanisms thereof of those statutes, that Biden had every power to do what he tried to do. The
I
Supreme
totally
Court
agree.
said, we are going to reverse engineer a way that he doesn't have the power to do this. So on the abortion issue specifically, I find it hard to believe that the radical right-wing partisan court would look at a democratically dominated legislature passing a bill that codified abortion protection nationwide. I would find it incredibly hard to believe that court would just let that happen. Very hard to believe that would
I
happen.
also have
they
my
would
doubts as well. Yeah.
I think they would reverse engineer a way to vote against it because they are not nonpartisan political actors. They are right-wingers with right-wing opinions doing right-wing shit.
But you have to again, you have to do analysis then on what basis it would be, because there is a basis, and that is from where does Congress derive this authority to enact legislation. And if you're going to say the Commerce Clause, then you need to actually run the analysis or what you think the Commerce Clause properly says. Otherwise, what you're saying is, I think Congress should be able to do anything they want all the time. And
and Pisco, that's all I'm responding to is this idea that, well, and I understand to some degree you're playing devil's advocate. The idea that, well, hey, I mean, hey, let's be fair here, right? The court technically is saying that it's up to the states, it's up to the democratically elected legislatures to decide these things. But the reality was, I think if they did decide those things, they would just find another reason to vote against it.
So that's kind of that there again. That's where I'm going back at my mega post here, and I'm just shocked because there's no oversight. So let me dial it back a bit. So
just guys reading his own post like, man, this is base.
I am. I'm like, this is gonna be fat material later. But it's like, again, I look at it in practical terms. There's no way we're going to get a constitutional amendment. Those are the one things. It's the one legislative or executive act.
There's no way you're impeaching the court.
Whereas it's not reviewable. It's not justiciable by the Supreme Court. So, but again, 2/3 supermajority, 3/4 of the states, not going to happen. And then I look at SCOTUS's ability that they have assumed themselves to just strike down as unconstitutional with a simple majority vote federal statutes, state laws, executive orders. And there's really, by the rules that SCOTUS wants us to play by, nothing that Congress or the president can do about it. Other countries, either, they'll modify the composition of their courts. So they'll expand them. They'll impose mandatory retirement ages. They'll impose elections or term limits or both or some combinations thereof. In some countries, in some states, in this United States, there has to be a supermajority to strike down a law. Like the United Kingdom is a great example. The High Court in the United Kingdom cannot declare an act of Parliament unconstitutional. They can basically send it back for review. But then Parliament can go, no, we're elected by the people. Go fuck yourself. Right now, typically, in the United Kingdom, the popularity of the courts is much higher here, which, by the way, Pisco, I feel like that's something which also should be factored in. There's this notion that Congress wields the purse and the executive the sword, and the court's supposed to have judgment. And basically their power is in whether or not the other two branches buy into their judgment and whether or not the people buy into their judgment. Well, right now, it's not looking good. If that's how you define the legitimacy of the court, which some people say that is how you should define the legitimacy of the court.
They're listening to the rulings. And my intuition is, yes, there are a lot of bad instances where the court can step in when they're not supposed to. I couldn't agree more with Econoboi on his interpretation of the student loan thing. I can go at length about why that was a ridiculous overturn by the Supreme Court. But my intuition is I'm very, very fearful of authoritarian takeover in this country. I think the incentives are a little bit different in a parliamentary system where the parties have much more control. Here, there is a unified head of state, and the parties don't necessarily control what that president does. And I think when the chips are down, I know the chips seem down right now, but you'll be glad and you'll be happy that there's a court.
Well, what's to keep this court from going rogue, I suppose, because that was the other thing I was thinking when you and Econoboi were going back and forth. Like maybe this would be the other way to pitch it. We have elections for members of Congress and for the president. And so at least in theory, the president has to be a bit careful and Congress has to be a bit careful because their positions can effectively be revoked. But the way the Supreme Court's designed now, it is effectively dominant over the other two branches, right? In terms of its interpretation, it can issue orders to Congress and to the executive, but not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
They're also unelected. They're not there's no mandatory requirements. Ethics requirements, Pisco. That's fucking insane. They question. We had Samuel Alito publicly question whether or not Congress had the authority to impose ethics requirements on the Supreme Court. I challenge.
You're not going to hear me defending. You're not going to hear me defending Samuel Alito.
Scalia died on the ranch of a guy who was currently under review by the Supreme Court. Right. I mean, not to mention all the gifts that they get. I mean, it's just, and to Josiah's point, I think that I don't know what Josiah is exactly saying in terms of what he feels like the scope of the court should be, but I just think that there's the tyranny that I fear is the tyranny of the Supreme Court. And what I mean by that is that the Supreme Court is talking about, they've already waved away one right that's been established for 50 years.
By the court itself.
Years.
By the court itself.
No. Well, Pisco, I understand, right? But we understand that courts can establish rights depending on.
Not if you don't have judicial review. If you have judicial review, those laws are still in force. In Texas.
Well, nonetheless, I don't think you agree with the Dobbs decision. Maybe you do, but like
I don't. But I agree with Roe, and Roe was the law of the land because of judicial review.
No, I'm not disagreeing with judicial review, right? And maybe Josiah is, but like what I'm saying though is that the court is talking about taking away established rights from people, like however they were established, right? And I think at the point where the court is saying we are going to recreate second-class citizenship status by taking away something like the right to a gay marriage, I think that is the type of tyranny that I would want to avoid, right? And that's why something like a independent nomination process and term limits and things like this, I think can help that problem, not completely gutting any authority the court has. And to be fair, I don't think that's what Josiah is probably saying. But, having, some sort of independence on the nomination side.
Look at how Congress responded to those threats, right? And overturning Dobbs. I know not on abortion, but again, and I think it matters that a lot of these rights that you say are established by the very court who, in coming to understand those rights, is striking down laws. And I know that you're not saying that you're against judicial review. This is more directed at Josiah. Josiah, in response to Dobbs and the thoughts of maybe the court is more open to undoing Obergefell, Congress acted. And Congress, now I know you're saying that they could maybe strike it down in some capacity in the future, but we don't know that now. And we know that at the very least, Congress did respond, and Congress passed a law, and that law at the very least shows that Congress is thinking about and being reactive to decisions that they don't agree with from the court.
So my position, I'll put it more organically. My position is this, that the Supreme Court of the United States was never intended, and I would argue it's irrational, not just in terms of our structure, but in the structures of other advanced democracies on earth. The Supreme Court of the United States is not meant to be the most powerful branch. It's supposed to be Congress.
I don't think it is. I think the president is right now.
But
the president is the most powerful branch of the government right now.
I
don't think it's close.
In terms of the ability to act proactively. But again, the president can't issue an order to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can issue an order to the president.
But the president doesn't have to. The president right now is in charge of this
the president doesn't have to
large bureaucracy, which absolutely institutes policy. Look at the night and day difference in how foreign policy, domestic policy, and the lives of people has been affected by the change in administration, Joe Biden into Trump, even without implementing legislation of any kind.
So what I will say is it depends on how we evaluate power. And again, in terms of activity, the ability to be proactive, the ability of day-to-day influence, I completely agree with you. The president he's effectively a branch unto himself, right? And it's a very proactive branch. I will not dispute that. But what I'm saying is that the deference that Congress and the president pay to the courts, it is a top-down, the way it is currently structured, it is effectively a top-down relationship where one branch can issue orders to the other two branches, but it not work the other way. Technically, it could in Congress, but you would again need a constitutional amendment. Federal statutes, as we just discussed, even the Respect for Marriage Act or the Defense for Marriage Act, I think it's the Respect for Marriage Act, which was passed to codify Obergefell protections. This 6-3 conservative supermajority could strike it down like this. And we talked about inventing bullshit legalistic reasons. These Supreme Court justices
it might not be bullshit realistic reasons. It might be real reasons. It might be good.
Sure, but what I'm saying is you can't. I don't
Disagree.
think you can effectively square this with the fundamental notion of checks and balances. The Supreme Court is de facto uncheckable in the way it currently conceives of its relationship with the other two
Should
branches.
Congress be allowed to violate the Constitution? And who decides whether something violates the Constitution?
Well, it's a matter of what do we feel like the role of the Constitution is, right? And do we feel like the interpretation of the Constitution should be static generation by generation, or is there room to interpret what we feel like are the established rights in the Constitution on a generational basis, right? Because I agree, like for instance, with gay marriage, right? I think anybody with a brain in their head and who's being honest would recognize that I don't think the framers of the Constitution who wrote the amendments that were justified in overturning the state constitutional bans on gay marriage thought, oh, when I'm writing this, this is going to make it to where gay marriage is legal nationwide, or like that's effectively how it should. And so I recognize that's a generational point of view for a more modern court, which was a significantly more centrist than it is today. But I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, right? And to Josiah's point, I'm not sure if it's so wrong, the idea that the court can establish rights based on the interpretation of the same text over time. And
that's a judicial philosophy point, Econoboi, and I agree with you on
Right.
that point. Yeah, it's perfectly valid, and it's not the first time that it happened. And one of the reasons why I disagree with the framing of the court right now, even though I do agree it's highly partisan, Neil Gorsuch, in a similar case about the extent to which protections in employment discrimination cases extend to gay people and LGBT individuals, said even though that they didn't have in their minds when Congress passed a restriction on discrimination in the workplace based on sex, that they weren't thinking about LGBTQ. The fact of the matter is that if you discriminate against a woman being married or attracted to women, and you wouldn't discriminate against a man be attracted to a woman, that is a discrimination on the basis of sex. And so those are examples, or that's one example in which, yes, there have been judicial philosophies that have been flexible enough, even for one of the most conservative members, Neil Gorsuch, to rule in favor of the liberal cause.
So
what does that have? What do you mean it's not as clear cut? Like
I don't think it's as clear cut that all these Supreme Court justices are stuck in the 1820s.
Well, don't get me wrong. I don't think they're going to bring back slavery or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is a Handmaid's Tale type, radical right wing government. But I think
I haven't seen that show.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, certainly it's the case that
if you saw the State of the Union rebuttal by Republicans, you saw about a 30-minute segment of it. Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying, like, certainly it's the case that this group of 9 people, as a collective, is significantly further right wing than the average American, right? And I think that one of the things that is interesting is that I think 538 did a similar analysis actually, which showed that the disaggregation of Supreme Court decisions with general popular sentiment has been very, very notable with this current Roberts Court, with all these right-wingers on, right? And so there's certain idiosyncrasies where, like you mentioned, like Gorsuch, he's very progressive with Native American issues, and he had that one ruling about sex discrimination in the workplace. Totally agree with that, but I just don't know if that's a good.
But look at the response, right? When there's a desync between the people and the court, the response on the left. Look at 2022 elections. What has been the case? Even in ruby red states, you are seeing abortion protections being put into action. And there has been, in response to a court that is out of touch and that isn't ruling, in my opinion, on many of these cases correctly, there are checks on that authority. And the Supreme Court's not going to step in until and unless they rule that, like Alabama, the embryos are individuals. We can talk about that later. They're not going to step into Ohio's abortion ban. Now, knock on wood. I don't think they will. I really doubt they will. Right. I really doubt they will. Right. And say you're not allowed to protect abortion.
But the gains that Democrats have made in the post-Dobbs era, what I'm saying is, again, under the current paradigm, even if those gains manifested itself in a federal abortion protection, SCOTUS could strike it down. So I keep going back to, it's not supposed to be a top-down linear relationship. There's supposed to be, I would argue, notions of checks and balances which work both ways. And by the way, I think the president should have a more meaningful role in the ability to check the court. you can say, well, Congress in theory can defund it. Congress in theory could change its appellate jurisdiction. Congress in theory could impose mandatory ethics. What power does the president have?
I'm just going to flip it around on you, Renee. So if Congress passed something that said states are forced to have constitutional carry laws, that is to say, they're not allowed to have. No,
I'll bite this bullet.
You say Congress should have the right to do that.
What I'm saying is, I would absolutely disagree with the outcome of that 100%. But I think, as a general paradigm, even if it can be used against me, I think that it's healthier for an advanced democracy to have a court that is not so protected from the political branches. That's my point. I fear a rogue Supreme Court more than I fear a rogue Congress fucking with the Supreme Court. That's where I default.
I fall into a similar bucket. I don't know what you mean by, like, because I think you have to be careful with. I think in general, when it comes to holding the judiciary accountable, I trust Congress more than the president, because Congress is a collectively elected body, and you have to keep in mind
this Congress more than the president.
Well, I mean, personally, I would say that when we're talking about delegating authority, I would say that, because you have to keep in mind, any power you give the president, you would have to think, well, how would the worst person individually who has this power would enforce it? And so, Josiah, to your point, like, what do you mean when you say the president can hold the judiciary accountable? Because now I'm imagining, well, if Trump was in office and the judiciary ruled, hey, turns out you can't just fire everyone you can fucking think of and destroy all these branches and do all this and that, what's the authority that the president has to hold the judiciary accountable?
Well, it depends. I would argue there's probably no constitutional basis for it, because the Constitution doesn't, besides nominating Supreme Court justices, which requires Senate confirmation. So even the one, de jure check that the president has on the Supreme Court is tempered by the Senate. Non-acquiescence, I would argue, is a big one. This idea that the president, that we just take it for granted that no matter what bad faith rogue ruling comes from the Supreme Court, the president is obligated to follow it. As much as I fear a rogue president, and I do, because obviously I'm anti-Donald Trump, I also look at the meaningful ways in which the president can be checked not only by Congress but by the courts. But it seems to only go one direction from a rogue court, which is a rogue court can check everybody else, and nobody effectively can check a rogue court.
Yeah, I guess my intuition is just different about where the danger lies. And I think that there are rulings that I could foresee. Like, imagine the Supreme Court said you have to kill all people of minority race, and that's I can think of rulings that would be so bad that the president would have to, he'd be duty bound to ignore it. I'm not telling you that I can never think of a hypothetical where I would be against it, but I don't think we're there yet. And I'm more fearful of a Trump-like figure having more of an avenue to centralize power.
Well, and to be clear, I want to be very clear. This is why I find this conversation so fascinating. I'm not saying that there is a single default solution that I am comfortable with. I think that this is the problem when you look at the structuring of nation states. There's no way to completely bad faith proof it, because it all requires reciprocal good faith as much as possible. I want to be clear. So that's why I find this fascinating. So it's a cost benefit analysis. The way I look at it, though, is, again, we stand alone. We stand alone in so many respects with how powerful our Supreme Court is. And I'm not saying that necessarily makes everyone else right, but to me, it does say something.
What about the First Amendment? We stand alone in the First Amendment. We do.
I'm not right, but I'm not saying that every nation.
And I think First Amendment is based.
Yes, but you don't think that a court this powerful is based. That's what I'm saying. Just because, like, there are some ways in which that we are relatively unique, like with First Amendment protections. I'm not saying, again, I added that caveat that doesn't mean that simply because we stand alone that we're wrong. But I'm saying that it does, to me, it's fascinating to me that other advanced democracies and even states within this country look at their high courts and go, okay, you don't get a blank check. You're going to have elections. You're going to have term limits. You're going to have mandatory retirement age, or all three, or combinations thereof.
America is an exceptional country. We also offer birthright citizenship to everyone who's born here. There are many ways in which America is different and special, and I value the ways that we're different and special. And sometimes,
but do you value it in this particular way?
I do value it in this way. Yeah.
So let's see. Expanding the court, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Mandatory retirement ages.
No.
Imposed ethics rules, as in one branch telling the Supreme Court, you will, not please, you will, abide by these ethics, these mandatory recusal requirements, these, disclosure forms, and we're going to put like this one special review board.
Or
and if
what would be my question? Or what?
Or what? Okay, so are you
Or you
saying
can be prosecuted like anyone
Right.
else who breaks the
Oh,
law.
if it's a criminal law, I think that's probably okay. But to
so
the
there?
extent,
That's what. Yeah, there would have to be some sort of threat, right?
yeah. My question is,
Right.
or what?
So would you be comfortable with the threat being prosecution by the executive branch?
Yeah, if it's severe enough, then maybe yes. But again,
I love that. I kind of like that. I like
look
that.
At where we are now. You're talking about envisioning laws to like go after Supreme Courts criminally for crimes, and so whatever that is, it's like it needs to be very, very high threshold. And typically, ethics rules are not criminal matters. They're not. They're just not for any other judge unless it reaches to a certain level, right, where it's actually.
But can't other
bribery or something,
judges? But sure, I understand that there's not the threat of criminal sanction. But like, correct me if I'm wrong. Can't like hire judges?
Yeah, they can come in and they can take the case away from them or do something like that.
Right. Right. So listen, I'm not saying it has to be the threat of force
But
either.
who's going to do it, right? Like
there has.
Is it some independent agency that Econoboi is inventing, where they
can't they be retired judges or recycled judges or random a lottery of judges?
I don't trust. I have to say this. I don't really trust this Congress or a Trump presidency to put some impartial people and decide who gets thrown off the case, put on the case, in because they determine the conflicts or non-conflicts. If someone was like, "Oh, you donated to Obama once, so you can't hear any case Obama was on," like I don't know. It just seems like.
Well, no,
What about
in a way? I mean,
Go
I think that would be. I don't know. Like I do. I guess I may have a more radical view in terms of the ethical requirements of all positions of government. Because I would say that, yeah, like even something as mundane as that. Like if you're a Supreme Court justices, guess what? You can't make political donations anymore. Just can't do it.
But
right?
back in the day,
Like,
right? Back in the day, they might have worked for the Obama Solicitor General's office, and if you worked for the Solicitor General's office,
sure. I mean, you would obviously have to. Of course, you'd obviously have to say that, hey, at the point of becoming a federal justice or something like that. I mean, to be fair, I would say the same thing about prosecutors in the Attorney General's office, right? It's like, hey, if you're going to be an AUSA or something like that, you have to maintain basically to the greatest possible extent like complete public and private political impartiality. Not that you can't have political opinions, but you can't be going to fucking rallies for Joe Biden at the same time. When
so if Josiah were appointed attorney, let's suppose Josiah's
I'm getting hot under the collar at the thought of it. Oh man,
Hunter Biden gets elected for his first term in office, and he appoints Josiah as Attorney General. What do you think about that?
What do you mean? No. I mean, I don't.
He's a political actor.
I'm recognizing that every court justice is a political appointment. So I recognize that somebody who's getting appointed to the justice to the bench is being appointed so because of their political affiliation.
They were shot.
History.
They were shot.
So what is this value add of the ethics? Does it really matter? I mean,
yes, of course it matters, right?
No, what I mean to say is like I understand ethics matters, but what I mean is like in terms of the public perception or in terms of what outcomes occur, how much is this just on the margin if we already think that the mere appointment signals
I think when we think about it, certainly it can prevent excesses as well. But I think that also when we think about I think you said it earlier that sometimes perception is reality, or somebody on this panel said, right? Which is
said that, yeah.
Like for instance, I think if you could peer into the truth of the universe through God's eyes and just simply
right here,
know,
just ask me, baby.
right there you go, right? But and just simply know for a fact that there is no ethical concern with Clarence Thomas taking, money to give speeches, or for his wife doing the same thing, or
not recusing himself from cases.
Exactly. If we could just know for a fact that this does not affect Clarence Thomas's judgment, I would still support all of these rules. Because at the end of the day, we can't peer into the eyes of God. We don't know that. All we are left with is the trail of circumstances that would lead any reasonable person to believe that this is a corrupt act. And that's why money in politics is bad. That's why these ethics rules need to be applied.
Yeah, sure.
Because confidence in institutions, I mean, you should know this, Pisco, confidence in institutions
I agree, yeah.
makes or breaks institutions. And
so
when people point to trails like this,
so Fani Willis should be forced off the case.
I don't know who oh, you're talking about
She's
the
the
Georgia
district
prosecutor? I
attorney
haven't
from
looked
Fulton
into it.
County.
Yeah.
See, I would argue there's a difference between a prosecutor and a judge, though.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
So this was where I think you did a disservice. We're not going to completely change the subject
Sure,
to Ellie
sure.
Mistel in his criticism of Attorney General Garland, because I do think, and I say this as a layman, maybe I'm wrong, but my layman's understanding of the legal system is there is a fundamental difference between a prosecutorial mindset and a judge's mindset. When a prosecutor on behalf of local, state, or federal government is going after the other side, they're not trying to be fair. They're trying
Conflicts
to
of
get a
interest are
victory.
not as important.
Wait a minute. Just let me
Okay.
fucking
My bad.
finish, okay? But I do think the role of a judge is there is supposed to be you are supposed to be above such partisan prosecutorial mindset that you're supposed to. I would argue, here's a hot take. It shouldn't be a hot take, but it might be from you, fucking Pisco, is that the Supreme Court justice, the Supreme Court justices should be held to higher ethics standards than the President of the United States. What do you think about that? Yeah.
I don't know about that. I'll have
You
to think
don't.
about it. Yeah, I don't.
Fucking-
I'll think about it and
I
get back to you.
I just think generally it's fair to say that all of our elected officials should be held to quite a high ethical standard,
Agreed.
in like generally speaking. And I would say that at the point when you have justices going on ranches of billionaires who are having cases in front of the Supreme Court,
Seems shady for sure.
I would say that again, and that's the point, is that all that in my view, for my rationale, all that I have to prove to convince myself is that it just seems wrong. And insofar as it seems wrong, certainly we should try to plug that hole, because if people start to lose confidence in these institutions because of perceived corruption, I mean, look, I've known local politicians who, I knew a local politician who said, "Oh, I had to review my portfolio because it turned out I had a piece of land."
Yes, they're
that
held
was
to
within-
high standards.
Yeah,
So-
like, and
listen,
it's ridiculous, right?
I agree. I agree with that. To be 100% clear, when you have Congress people like hauling into court these ridiculous, impeachment inquiries into Joe Biden that are totally baseless on provable falsehoods or misleading facts and all that stuff. When I see that kind of conduct in this Congress and what has become of our legislators, I'm not disagreeing with you necessarily that ethics matter and that some of these appear to be ethics violations or there needs to be some other process that could be invented. I am wary of Congress being in charge and in a substantive way over the judiciary. I think that there needs to be an independent judiciary, even if it's only in the appointment process or whatever you want to say. But I just think that I don't have the same confidence in Congress that you guys do.
Well, I think it's also
like, for
because
instance,
I
yeah,
think
was
it's
gonna
also
say, like-
because
go for it.
it's harder for this. It's harder for Congress. I would argue it's harder for Congress to act. So you're talking about powers being divided between 535 voting members. So not to say that Congress can't be politically damaging as MAGA Republicans are to President Biden potentially. But I would argue that it's infinitely easier for the United States Supreme Court in its 9-person composition to issue a ruling. Because I mean, can't litigants judge shop file a case in a certain district knowing that it'll make its way to the Supreme Court?
They do. They already do that. Yeah.
The Supreme Court grants cert based on its own discretion. So if the Supreme Court and a conservative legal system and when I say legal system, I don't mean hundreds of actors. I mean handfuls of actors want to really get a particular issue to the United States Supreme Court, I would argue it's infinitely easier than Congress to act.
But they do that, and Democrats do it too. And sometimes it's based when Democrats do it. And I think a good example of that was in Wisconsin, where there was a change in membership, and the Democrats played by the Republican playbook, and there was a responsiveness to the unholy think about the Wisconsin maps,
gerrymandered
right?
maps, yeah.
You're telling me, right? Like if that legislature, against the clear command of the Wisconsin Constitution, which was enacted by the people of Wisconsin, that they should be unmoored from any kind of review of their decisions, and that the people shouldn't be able to respond by. I know that the link to the judges or the justices in Wisconsin is more direct. You vote for the judge, and maybe that's a solution that you're in favor of. Although I'm not for some reasons, but right? Don't you think that was based? Don't you think that was based for the? Yeah,
you're never going to get me on I'll never quibble with various outcomes. For example, again, you point to the Roe v. Wade, abortion rights in this country. My understanding is and again, I'm not a lawyer, you are, but my understanding is that even like liberal and progressive attorneys said that the logic employed by Roe v. Wade was tortured, even though we favor the outcome. I'm not going to, both of these things can be true at once. I too would prefer legislative outcomes to judicial activism. I don't think that these things are mutually exclusive. So when you say, Josiah, this version of the Supreme Court as it's currently structured, maybe not its current composition, but the way it's currently structured, can deliver you outcomes you like. Shouldn't you take that into consideration? Sure. But what I'm saying is I feel like increasing checks and balances against this court, again, either mandatory retirement, term limits, expanding the court, supermajority requirements to strike down this idea that you can strike down an act of Congress with a 5-4 majority. Maybe it should be a 7-2 super, whatever. I mean, there are all sorts of configurations and permutations of a court that we can consider. I like that idea more. I like the idea that even if it risks potentially costing me outcomes that I'd prefer, the idea of our institutions being fuckable with each other, by each other, instead of just two and then the one held apart, which is currently in the hands, I would argue, of a 6-3 radical conservative supermajority, that is uncomfortable with it. I don't see how there's any timeline in which it's emphatically worse when you make the Supreme Court more vulnerable, because you can say, well, the good cases might be at risk, but so too with the bad cases. So I just don't understand how it would be work. Can you?
I think when the chips are down, you'll understand. That's all I can elaborate right now. But and you might say the chips are down right now. I think from a broader, more long-term perspective, for decades into the future, I think having more. I think that this court is checkable in many ways. And between the actors I'm most worried about in our current constitutional system, the Supreme Court is near the bottom of my list. I think the states have been misbehaving. I think Congress has been misbehaving, and in Trump, if he's in office, he'll be misbehaving. So,
well, I think that the thing about, I think that what's interesting though about democracy and democratic system, and frankly, just like government structures in general, is that we've really run quite a number of experiments, right? And that there have been thousands of different iterations. I mean, probably tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if you're counting the local and sort of provincial level, of different ways to structure government, right? And it seems like this is an argument we had with Destiny. I mean, I think it was the three of us, not Staxioms, but it was Josiah, you, Pisco, and myself, where
don't worry,
we were arguing
Staxioms is such an institutionalist simp
on the Garland thing, right?
No, it wasn't just I don't think it was the Garland thing. It was the
Senate filibuster,
right? Where he is like Destiny's stupidest political opinion by far is that he thinks that the filibuster is actually a good thing. And I think he also to some degree believes in the Electoral College. And his concern is like, well, he's like, well, I'm just concerned with, if you have like, 51% of the country can just do whatever they want, and there's like literally no check and it's like, well, the thing is, Destiny, and this is my response to you, Pisco, is like, we've run this experiment. There are very hyper majoritarian governments out there where, like if you have 51% of the parliament, you can just pass whatever you want. Take the UK.
You can get rid of your head of state. You can get rid of
exactly.
You vote
in the UK. I mean,
like that,
for God's sakes, in the UK, they have the House of Lords, but the House of Lords never fucks around because what they always say is, well, if the House of Lords ever fucked around, we would just abolish them. The House of Commons would just get rid of them.
Yeah, but the parliamentary systems are a little different. I mean,
the parliamentary systems are different. But what I'm saying though is that if you look at the structure of many other Supreme Courts, now again, I'm not necessarily talking about reducing the scope of judicial review like Josiah is talking about, but at the very least, I think that something like a self-replicating independent nomination process with a term limit is just so incredibly not radical if you look at many of the other structures. And I think many other countries on the planet have been able to guarantee robust and to a large degree greater civil protection and human rights than our court has been able to guarantee, or our governing structures have been able to guarantee, without having this like incredibly unaccountable lifetime appointed court. I mean, somebody mentioned in the comment, Pisco, like what if we came up with cybernetic augmentation where people could live 100 years longer? Do we think a guy from the 1800s, just because he can live to be 200 years old, should be able to be on the court for life? No, of course not.
I think that there's I think the life tenure starts to make less sense when you increase. So I agree that there's a year's connectivity there to it. And
There's some like upper bound.
Yeah, I think there's an upper bound there. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you it can't be any way else. It can't be some other reform, or we could never function as a democracy with lifetime. I'm not here to tell you that.
We're getting him there, Josiah. One step at a time.
We're nudging him.
But that's never been my position. That's never been my position. My position is that it's not worth our effort right now. And if everyone was agreed on it, and we could pass an amendment on it, and we could cap it at some long term of years, because I think it should be long. I think it should be more than 10 years. Because I think there are good notions to having some people being judges being repeat players. I think that makes sense too. So I would certainly be over 10 years. If we get everyone sort of agreeing on that notion and have it be a long set of years, I suppose maybe I would be okay with that, as opposed to the lifetime tenure. Lifetime tenure for me is just like it's a way to get there, and for people to understand. And since there is that upper cap on human life, that, hey, you're not going to be able to influence this person. That's why I think it's such a good a rule of thumb. But the problem is that would take so much political capital, in my opinion, and it would make Democrats look unhinged, like they just want to control everything and institute autocracy. It's not worth our time. It's better worth our time to win elections and to nominate people in the positions that already exist.
I would agree with that
a little bit more.
Well,
I
don't think anybody here is quibbling with the practicality of it. I just, again, even that answer that you just provided is not Supreme Court proof. So it's like, let's focus on getting people elected and pass laws that we like. Oh, fuck, they still have to go up against
an amendment is not Supreme Court proof?
Yeah, but okay, again.
Then that's a war.
Yeah, that is, again, I keep going back to the statistic is a statistic, right? Yeah. So you have 12,000 attempts to amend the Constitution and only 27 amendments. It's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. We're not going to get a constitutional amendment anytime soon, which, by the way, would require us revoking all kinds of gerrymandering.
To me, it's almost, and I'm sorry, it's an important conversation. So I know that what I'm about to do is going to be dismissing it or saying it's important. I'm going to say it. It feels a little bit to me like we're the socialists talking about the communist utopia that could come in some other state. It's hypothetical, because to me, it's such outside the realm of possibility that we can get an amendment to get rid of term limits, that I would just rather play the game that we have. And I think that the rule of thumb of the rest of your life is okay. We can play with that game, and it makes sense from a longevity standpoint.
Well, this is a principled, abstract conversation. Yeah, I think that to be fair, when we're talking about, honestly, I think that the current composition of the Supreme Court probably helps Democrats get elected, if anything, right? Because I think that every time the court rules something incredibly radically right-wing, as they are one to do these last
people respond,
years, people tend to get really pissed off. And as much as Trump wants to say, he wants to cake and eat it too, we got rid of Roe v. Wade, but also don't blame me for the abortion stuff. I mean, it's like a very difficult messaging campaign that the Republicans are faced with, where the court might rule, something completely radical, and somehow simultaneously the Republicans in closed doors, or when they're talking in primary voters, they'll say, look at what we did. We appointed all these right-wingers to the court. Isn't that great? But then in the general election, they'll have to say, well, we appointed all those right-wingers to the court, but, the Democrats are groomers. Never forget that, right? It's like, it's not a good look for them. And so I'm not sure it's a great use of political capital either. And I don't think Biden has shown I don't think Democrats are planning on running on that message anytime soon. But, certainly I think if we're having the principled conversation, I think there's definitely room. I mean, on the Three Wonks podcast we started, we did an episode recently about all the things we would do to change American institutions. It was like a 2.5 hour long discussion, which literally we must have talked about 100 different things we would change about the whole structure of the American government to make things better.
You solved American institutional necrosis in 2.5 hours. That's fucking. Y'all should like and subscribe. By the way, the Three Wonks podcast, if you have not already. Seriously, you should. It's good.
It took quite a lot of time, but no, I mean, to be fair though, I think that
Econoboi, say something nice about the conservative justice. Say something nice about each one of them.
Well, I would say that, Clarence Thomas, I think he is probably one of the more principally conservative justices. I think he was a lot more principled than like Alito or Scalia, because I think that he even talked about how he's talked about how like even he doesn't think that the federal government has an ability to regulate like marijuana use, that he thinks that just functionally just shouldn't be allowed. And he disagreed with Scalia on that. It was one of the few disagreements he had with Scalia, whereas Scalia reverse engineered a stupid reason why he would be against it. I like Alito because he shows how incredibly crazy some of the right wingers are on the court. He's great for that purpose.
Well, no,
showing
he's
how
also
insane
really good
people
at
can
oral
get.
argument. He has some of the hardest questions, and
Yeah.
You heard
even
it
if
here
you're
first.
against it,
Well, he's one of the
good at
biggest
it.
assholes.
He
I
makes,
oral
agree.
game.
he makes
Uh,
people squirm. He makes people squirm, and I hate his questions because they're usually very good.
So
Neil
you would say
Gorsuch is
that
pretty
Alito's,
based on
hang on,
Native
to clarify,
American rights.
to clarify, you would say that Alito's oral prowess makes people squirm?
Can you stop this nonsense
That's
right
true.
away, Ruben? Or Jizza?
Yeah.
I keep dead naming you. Sorry.
Stop it!
I know.
By the way, it's because of Staxioms that I changed my name. By the way.
Yeah, I've
Oh,
told
okay.
him quite a bit.
No,
Rum
I-
1 and 8.
Unbelievable.
Clearly, it worked.
I kept calling him Rum 1 and 8, and he's like, I need to change my name.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, like, it sounds funny to say that, you were able to solve these problems in a 2.5 hour conversation. But I think that does go to show, however, that you really could only change if you did like 5 different regulatory changes or structural changes. I think that would legitimately solve maybe 90% of the issues that at least I would have with the Supreme Court. And I think that we would have a much more structurally sound and, sort of amount of confidence in the court going forward. And same thing with
Let me
a lot
give you
of
what you want.
American
Let me tie this all together with a bow. I'm not against reforms in the main. I am skeptical about any reform that would require a constitutional amendment. That's what I'm skeptical about. And so I would be open to expanding the court, to changing elements of the jurisdiction, maybe. So you have me on that, but I don't love us being so invested in like the term limit stuff and the independent agencies appointing. I think that might be a little bit pie in the sky, even if it is eventually a good idea when we have cybernetic enhancements.
Short of a constitutional amendment, in theory, couldn't the Supreme Court engage in judicial review? Like, even let's just say, like,
judicial revocation of
or
the legislative revocation.
Ethics concerns, the appellate process, the composition.
That's a
of the
crisis.
court.
If Congress says, "Hey, we're eliminating appellate review over this," and the court says, "No, you're." But that's also what Israel happened. You guys know what's happened in Israel with the court a little bit. I don't know that much, but there was an effort by the Knesset, I believe, to strip jurisdiction or at least some kind of authority from the court, and the court ruled that revocation itself was unconstitutional to some degree, and it was a close decision, I think. How do you guys feel about that? I thought you guys are probably like, awesome, base, Netanyahu sucks, all that stuff, right? But at the same time, it's doing exactly right here you're so fearful of, which is taking away the power from the legislative branch. But there, when it's in your favor in Israel, I think we would all be like, that's super based for the.
Well, I don't see there's a disconnect there. I'm sure many of us would celebrate
on outcome
of a flawed process.
That's an outcome-oriented approach. It's not.
But wait a minute.
Yes.
Wait, I'm confused. Are you saying I can't celebrate? Are you saying that I can't simultaneously quibble with the process and want to change the process, which I do, and also not celebrate now? Am I obligated to say?
I think people will quibble at you for being unprincipled if you say, I'm okay with judicial review when Netanyahu's in power. And what
if I take the position that as long as judicial review is a reality in the way in which it exists, I'm fine with this particular.
Why
outcome.
is Israel bound by like America's judicial review? What Israel said is or at least the voice of the Knesset. I don't agree necessarily all of Israelis believe this, but the voice of the Knesset, the elected membership of their voice, said we're done with judicial review, at least in this way, whatever way that was. I don't know all the details here. So, but just assume it's how I'm saying.
It's just a matter of why they made that decision, right? So, like, for instance, I think that in the case of Israel, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with like the democratically elected government doing things that they feel like represents their constituents. I think that the issue, and again, I'm about as familiar with it as you are probably, which is to say not deeply familiar, but I think that the issue that a lot of Israelis had with that, which is why it inspired so many protests, was that this was like this was a direct attempt to try and get Netanyahu specifically to be out from under all of these corruption charges that were brought against him, right? And so in that regard, I'm not criticizing the ability of the judiciary to review these things. I'm criticizing the proposal of the Democratic government to amend these processes basically just
for
to
the
protect
purpose
one
of
person from corruption. It's the same thing. Like I don't necessarily disagree that, hey, if you mentioned Republicans could pass a law that would institute constitutional carry nationwide. I don't disagree that Congress should have an ability to pass nationwide laws. I would just disagree with that law that
law.
was passed. You know,
Right,
exactly.
right. Or take it another way. So like somebody, I think it was Econoboi who earlier mentioned the filibuster. You know what's funny is I don't advocate for the abolition of the filibuster because to me the
Wow,
filibuster is
cringe.
a tool. Wait a minute, let me fucking finish. Because the filibuster is a tool that it's like a hammer. It can be used to hit a nail or it can be used to crack a baby in the skull. It has a utility. The Democrats use the filibuster appropriately, I would argue, at least in terms of the outcomes I like, to stop Republican governments from enacting policies I dislike.
That's your
However,
deep state coming out.
what I propose is in all instances, no matter who is in power and who's in the minority, I think the filibuster should be harder to use. When the filibuster was created, the imposition was on the filibustering party. You had to get your ass up there. You had to talk on topic. You had to stand. Basically, the bargain was this. We have a majority. The majority should generally be able to get its way. If you, the minority, want the power to stop the majority, you're going to get your shot, but they get to kick back and the burden is on you. I don't think that that's unprincipled at all to say I would still keep the filibuster. I would just make it harder to employ because it's a tool that can be used to stop bad faith Republican government. So why would I get rid of it? I would just make it harder for both parties to use.
Jumping jacks and see how long they can do jumping jacks.
And I'm not saying it has to go that far, but I don't. So my point. But my point is, Pisco, I don't think that that's unprincipled at all. That's me saying that here is a tool that, on the whole, I'd like to keep, even though I know it can be used against me.
You want to change it to better calibrate it. Yeah, I understand.
Which is how I look at the Supreme Court. I recognize that all the things I propose could be used against me. I don't pretend that that's not the case. I just think that on the whole, it would be better for everyone if the Supreme Court were not so unaccountable in its current structure, because so much is riding on them.
Would you be saying the same thing if they were coming to decisions that you liked essentially?
I hope I would. We don't live in that timeline because we haven't had a liberal majority in 50 years.
My guess is,
but here's the reality. Regardless of whether or not in that alternate timeline I would say it would still be true. So wait a minute. So Pisco, do you think that if Barack Obama, let's just say Joe Biden, Joe Biden is a president I like. You've watched my content, you know I like him.
I like.
Do you think I would support
Father Joe?
Do you think I would support Joe Biden declaring himself dictator for life?
No, I don't.
So there you go. That's your
I think there's some measures that are so whatever, right? But never forget, Josiah, never forget that there's the other ratchet as well, and that this court, maybe not this specific court, but 5-4 upheld Obamacare when they could have. Explain that one for me, Chief. Explain Sebelius.
I don't think that this is the worst iteration that the court can possibly be. I want to be very clear.
Okay.
That I don't think this is as bad as it gets. I think the court has gotten considerably worse. There are decisions like Sebelius that obviously went the way I want. The Supreme Court still, it's not like it strikes down. It's not like it rules against the president or Democrats in every opportunity. I'm just saying that we have a structure which does not really incentivize good behavior and good faith behavior, I would argue, by the Supreme Court, unless they fear consequences.
And you know when I was most proud of our judiciary ruminate and why I defend them? And now I'm going to get on my soapbox. Ready? This is me getting on my soapbox.
Do it. Stand up.
Because when the chips were down in 2020, and I'm going to say it, the barbarians were at the gates trying to steal our 2020 election. You know who was a force field protecting us against that?
The United States Supreme Court.
The United States Supreme Court, the federal judiciary, and state judiciaries all over the country were putting up walls against these bad faith attempts to steal our election and our democracy. And so when the chips were down, they defended us from the tyranny of Trump. And so, yeah, maybe they rule against me on Section 3. Maybe they rule against me on any number of policies, Roe v. Wade, Dobbs, all that stuff. But when the chips were down, and when the 2020 election was in dispute and they were trying to steal it from the people, they defended us.
Okay, but now we're 4 fucking years later, baby. What about now? What about the decision to take the case? They're not obligated to grant cert. They took the case. We're going to hear Trump's immunity case and to schedule it the last fucking day of their term.
Wait, I have a question.
And while issuing a stay as well, does that not benefit?
They didn't issue a stay. No, they didn't issue a stay.
I thought it was issued stay pending ruling.
A stay would have been worse because a stay would have signaled it would have been longer and it would have signaled that they're going to rule in favor of Trump. But
I have a question for you.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So Well, number one, I would just say that, for instance, in the UK, when Boris Johnson tried to suspend Parliament in order to push through his package of reforms, they even their Supreme Court said this is illegal based on basically pure procedural grounds. And so I think that similarly, I'm not sure that any reform that I would recommend would cause the court to act much differently in response to 2020. But the question for you is, let's say that with this specific case on the presidential immunity stuff, because if I it's actually so unbelievable. If I understand the arguments that Trump's lawyers are making, they're essentially making the argument that the president can basically do literally whatever he wants. And the only way to hold the president accountable as the president is to impeach him. And that unless you have the votes to impeach the president, you basically can't do anything to the president, no matter what the president does, right?
By the way, that is the Justice Department's position, just so you know. And I'm going to explain why.
Whatever. But the point is, though, is that I think that the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court actually agreed with that logic, like I think that there's an upper bound. You mentioned that there's an upper bound on the age thing. I think you talked about like what if the court ruled that, I don't know, there was a military dictatorship.
Yes, if they rule in favor of Trump in this case, that will fundamentally change how I view the Supreme Court for sure.
Okay, yeah. And that's good because there are just certain things that I feel like if the Supreme Court ruled, that would be so incredibly crazy. Like, okay, because again, like the implications are Biden can just put Trump in prison and just arrest every Republican in Congress, and there's no consequences because now there's only Democrats in Congress. Like the logic would be crazy, and that's part of the thing that I think Josiah is signaling to. The fact that they would even take this case is crazy. It seems like, right? Like it's very worrisome.
Listen, I don't like that they took it. I think that there are four justices who are trying to potentially slow things down. Keep in mind, though, in the main run of cases, it's extremely fast for the court to take this up. And so I was absolutely disappointed by the court deciding to not just deny the petition for cert, or the whatever they interpreted as the petition for cert. So I agree with you, and that's just, it signals to me that there's at least some justices who want to slow down the proceedings. But that doesn't signal to me necessarily that you're going to get 5 votes to say that the presidential immunity extends to former presidents on anything within their official ambit. So to be 1,000 trillion percent clear, if the court were to rule in favor of Trump in this case, that would fundamentally change my view of the court, because that decision to me would be so perverse, so beyond Dobbs. Beyond.
Well, what if even one justice ruled in favor of it?
No, I don't think it reaches that threshold. If the court as a body, I'm going to say, but it would absolutely change my view of that justice. But for me, Alito in many ways and Thomas are kind of there already, in my view of how I view their position on the court. Even though I respect the fact that they are justices, I don't really think that there's a lot of principle, at least a lot of their rulings. Or how their opinions, and I have reasons for that. But this case, I think, is very important for me in terms of how I view the legitimacy of the court. That said, it is way faster than any Supreme Court opinion briefing typically is. Special Counsel Smith directly asked previously the Supreme Court to take this case and said, you are the only one who can resolve it. And the special counsel has not really given any good legal reasons why it should be expedited, right? What are the good legal reasons why it should be expedited? You're going to say, well, the election's coming up. We want to have it before the election. Is that a legal reason to have it faster? I don't know.
You're asking.
Yeah, I mean, it can be rhetorical. You don't have to answer right now, but like, think about it. Those of you who are saying the court, I don't agree. I think that the court granted it when they should have just denied it.
I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Quick fact check. I'm sorry. Wait, Pisco, what's the difference? They said that for when they granted cert, that the DC court, who had the previously highest iteration of the court, which ruled on the immunity case, they told the DC appellate court to put its ruling on hold. That's different from a stay, right?
Yes. So a stay, granting a stay would be like, you're likely to win on the merits, or at least there's a good chance you're going to win on the merits, and it would be longer too. It would signal that the Supreme Court agrees with Trump substantively, because one of the standards for doing that is to show likelihood to succeed on the merits, and it would be longer. And there definitely wouldn't have been now there's like, it's probably not likely they're going to have a trial before the election, but it would absolutely kill it. So again, the question on the table is as follows. Can you think of a legal reason why the Supreme Court should expedite hearing this case? as opposed to a political reason. And I think, remember, Jack Smith has not argued, hey, you should consider the election and having this trial before the election as a reason. And think about how you would feel if the court were influenced by like, oh, we want to have this trial before the election so the American people know. Like, that seems like exactly the kind of thing that you don't want them to consider. And so even them using, Jack Smith's unwillingness to cite that should tell you a little bit about what are the incentives in this case, and the fact that it's being heard on a much, much, much faster timeline than most other cases, I think should say a lot.
How quickly did they hear the immunity case? Or not the immunity case, the 14th Amendment case from Colorado?
Much faster, but the reason for that was there's actually a legal reason. That is the deadline legally of the primary is coming up, and there needs to be some disposition on it before the primary, but there's no connection, right? The case relates to the thing that's about to happen. That is the Section 3 claim, the legal claim, is connected to the event that's close in time, that is the primary itself. There is no necessary connection, legal connection, between the criminal case and now everyone knows that there's a political, obvious.
Could you make the case that there is
a
wait a minute, how do you parse between national interest? How do you parse between politics, national interest, and legal?
So what I would say is a legal reason to have it first is because there's some dispositive event that's going to come. It's going to moot everything, right? So like if there's a tractor trailer outside of your, sorry, not a bulldozer outside of your home, and the question is do you have the right to bulldoze it?
Sure.
And they're going to bulldoze scheduled in 2 weeks. And so the court needs to have a disposition before them, because if they wait longer than that, then they're going to bulldoze your home. And so they want to do it quickly. That would be different than maybe, and maybe I can elaborate in a more abstract way to define those differences.
But well, that's fair. But couldn't you make the case then by that standard? Isn't the timeline with respect to the trial versus the election, doesn't it have some legal basis? Because if Trump wins the presidency, he can fire the special counsel.
I think it's more attenuated. But
so you'd have to go down the line, like it's not direct. It's a couple more steps.
Because it assumes a couple things, which is like, one, that
Trump will win.
The Trump will win. Two, that Trump will shut down the cases. Now we all think he will, and we all know he will, and we all think it's possible that Trump get elected. And we all know that this case is relevant to whether Trump gets elected or not. But in terms of whether the court should consider those facts, like should the court be thinking about whether Trump will take away these cases or promote those cases? In a sense, we kind of give discretion to the president to have control over the executive branch. And so why would it be improper for the president to appoint an attorney general who agrees with him, and the attorney general then like dismisses the cases? Is that something that's like inconceivable? And something that I think that you think that Merrick Garland should do. I think you thought that Merrick Garland should be more aggressive and explicitly political against Republicans. And so it would seem inconsistent for you to then be like,
motherfucker.
Yeah,
I reject the framing of that part right there. I would just ask him to like, I don't know, not make political considerations in the other direction. Like, golly gee, we have a predicate here. There were prosecutors who worked for Garland who said that there was predicate to investigate Trump formally after January 6th. To start a formal investigation. People tried to do it, to launch a formal investigation.
I don't know anything about that. There's not been
well, I will link you to listen, we will have that separate argument. I will link you to the article and we'll hash it out. I'm just saying, I agree. Let's go after Republicans as a political consideration. But also, let's give Republicans even more slack than we would otherwise, because it could be seen as political if we just.
Okay, fair enough.
That is also
my ending point is, yes, to Econoboi's point, this case would matter a lot in terms of my view of the legitimacy of the court, but I don't think what they've done so far in failing to just deny outright and accepting the cert grant, which the special counsel asked for in the first place, and the presence of all these factors, that this ruling is like the worst they've ever done, or something that signals that they're going to rule in favor of Trump. I think it's bad, but it's not. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, what do you make of the argument, though, that, okay, if they were going to look at this case, they should have just granted Smith's expedited request in the first place? Why? I know that it's unusual, but it's not unprecedented.
It is unusual. Yeah. Well, that could be enough, because Smith did not give a legal reason for why they should do that unprecedented thing. Now, I happen to think that maybe he should have just bit the bullet and said, hey, we all know the election's coming up, and do the kind of analysis that you're arguing for, Josiah, which they could have done. They chose not to. And so if the court is not hearing the legal reason why they should expedite it, can you blame them for being like, no, we're going to do normal things? And again, I don't agree with what the court did, but you have to also deal with what Smith did. And Smith asked for review and didn't give a extremely pressing legal reason for the extraordinary expedition that what's the word? What's the noun version of expedited? I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Expeditious?
Timeline. Yeah, exactly.
Expedient, maybe.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's
My
fine.
brain's
It's
mush.
fine. Well, listen, we're 3.5 hours in,
Oh,
and
wow.
there's so much I want to unpack here. But listen, let me just say this. We'll give everybody closing statements. I tried to at this guy earlier, this Nicholas Demas right here. Okay, I've tried to at you, but it's not letting me. I don't know if you're on Discord or if you're on Twitter. You DM me on Twitter or Discord. I'm going to put it in here, and we will set up time for you to educate me. That's my Twitter, and Pondering 1018. And by the way, the people I'm with are the most argumentative fucks you've ever encountered. So if you guys disagree with Pisco or Econoboi on anything, let's set something up, and we'd be happy to talk with you about this. But yeah, so all I'll say in conclusion, and I'll give it to the rest of you, is that I'm pretty pleased with the idea that we're moving Pisco just a little bit. In 3 more conversations, Pisco is going to want a 45-person iteration of the Supreme Court, all term limited with mandatory retirement ages. And it's going to be federal statutory requirement that only Democrats can appoint those justices in the first place. That's where Pisco is going to be in 3 conversations.
Yeah, and where you'll be is drinking adrenochrome with your friends in the Department of State and the DOJ, and manipulating events behind the scenes and going after MAGA conservatives who just want to defend the country.
Yeah. All right. So Convoy, Stax, Pisco, any final words, or plug your shit too? Definitely 3 wonks. I need to put that in there. Actually, can you all type in chat?
Oh, which chat is that?
I don't think I can.
I don't think you can from Restream.
That's okay.
No.
I'll send it while you all are talking. I will find
in
all
your
your
YouTube.
links.
Yeah. I think all that I would say is that yes, I agree with Josiah. We're getting Pisco closer to Athenian court, where everyone's a court justice if you show up to the case, and you all can vote on it if you want. And I think that's a really good movement, I think, overall for our country. But no, it was really fun talking. I think obviously we're all seemingly strong, well, if I had to guess, like relatively strong Biden supporters or center left people. And for those wondering, there's definitely CIA money behind this show. So we all got our checks in the mail this past Friday. So I'm excited to get that money flowing in. And yeah, it was really fun talking. And yeah, I guess subscribe to 3 Wonks if you want, and go from there. So.
And Econoboi, I linked that too. I'm getting Pisco's stuff right now. So Pisco, go ahead, baby.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a very interesting discussion. I love the both aspects of it, kind of shooting the shit a little bit and being a little unserious, which I think you guys are all sort of in good fun. And also I do love the in-depth disagreement and the discussion there. I think that, again, not to put too fine of a point on it, but like we all basically agree in the main strokes about where this country needs to go, and more specifically where this country should not venture. And so on that point, I'm glad that we can be a voice for I don't know, for a more rational discussion from the left, and one that's based in electoral politics and winning. So on that note, thank you guys very much, and it was a pleasure to meet you, Stax, for the
yeah. No, I'm glad I pushed you with all of my eloquent and verbose arguments. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome, guys. Thanks for doing this. This was kind of a trial run to see if we want to do something like this in the future. Again, my conception was 90 minutes, but there's so much shit to talk about. We'll see.
Maybe more narrow next time. More narrow.
I know, fuck it. But it was because honestly, you and I were supposed to. We were trying to find some time to have some of these conversations, and I know Econoboi is at least a little bit like me in the sense where he wants some institutional changes, but you are too. So I wanted to test where the balance was. Staxioms is an institutionalist shill. He wants nothing to change.
To the core.
He thinks that Democrats, we fought about this
everything's
all the time.
Fine.
He thinks that Democrats should continue to play the game of politics on the hardest mode possible. No changes whatsoever. So
that's exactly my position. Yeah.
All right, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh,
Please like and
last
subscribe
thing. Josiah, when do you stop having control over my social media?
As soon as you leave the stream.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna leave.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate it, guys. Again, hopefully we'll do this again soon. Thank you. Thanks for chat for participating.
For sure.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Hey, so, okay, fuck you. All right. Seriously, everybody, I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. Again, the chat kind of went all over the place because there was so much to talk about, but the original conception is 90 minutes and with more like specific topics, but I had to talk about the Supreme Court stuff and like the structure. It's so fascinating, like constitutional systems and governmental systems. You said one of the nerdy things I like to do is, just kind of conceive of if you could optimize a democratic republic in terms of codified structure, what would it look like? The game is like Republican GOP proof your government. And obviously there's no way to do that, right? Again, it's all predicated on reciprocal good faith, but it's fascinating to see like the United Kingdom and various Scandinavian countries, Canada, I mean a lot of Commonwealth countries, not just the United Kingdom. Brazil's a great example where they have taken, they've been influenced by the United States and they've taken so much of what we did and they've improved on it. Like many countries adopted an electoral college, but then ditched it along the way. And so, yeah, it's fascinating. Awesome discussion to listen to. Would like to see some good faith arguments representing conservative legal perspective and possibly some even bad faith MAGA arguments. That'll happen initially, or that'll happen eventually. We definitely want people, like I said, we can make time for that 5x6 guy and Nicholas Demos. They can just at me and we'll make time to have conversations and stuff like that. Would love to do all this stuff. So wait a minute. Maybe it doesn't. Hang on. Maybe I have to unpair them. Is Stax still streaming? Because I don't want to have total control of their stuff. Can somebody confirm if Stax is still streaming? I believe Brazil makes the justices debate. Yeah. So like they have, I think they bifurcate their Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken. They have one which effectively makes like constitutional considerations. And then there's other, which is like the highest appeals court. Whereas our Supreme Court, that's the other thing. It's both the highest appellate court and also determines constitutional matters. Oh, fuck. Pisco says I'm still online. Hang on. Let me, we're going to unpair this. How do I do this? Do I have to end stream? No, I don't want to end stream quite yet. We're gonna, all right. We're gonna end stream because I don't want to like it's not fair to them to keep like regurgitating my stuff. But yeah, I appreciate this, folks, and we'll do this hopefully again in the near future. And then I think I'm streaming by myself on Tuesday. So appreciate it. Everybody, please like and subscribe. Pisco, Econoboi, and the Three Wonks and Staxioms.